All right, welcome everybody to the Human Resources Committee meeting for August 2018, already August, and with the beautiful weather we have dilly bars, which reminds me of a guy named Dilly Bar Dan who was eating a dilly bar in the middle of a Minnesota Golden Gophers football game, and he got the nickname Dilly Bar Dan. So we can all be having a dilly bar at our school board meeting, and that'll be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Superintendent. To kick things off, we have the staffing report, action items, a summary of that. Anything you want to discuss there? Hearing none, I'll move us along here in the meeting order. And just a note to my fellow board members, I will abstain from voting on the staffing report due to a family member being on there. Looking at HR action items, we have several placeholders for potential contract agreements. And we can start with the clerical.
Still trying to get my dilly bar down. We sent out the clerical contracts electronically, and it's two-year contracts. I also included a list of the changes from the previous. One of the things I would say, we ultimately, when we went into mediation on the vacation issue, we did allow some more vacation. It wasn't quite where we wanted, and it wasn't where they wanted. But in exchange for that additional time, they did go with a 0% increase in that first year, which I think is significant because, you know, that can compound going forward. So from the mediation sessions, and their increases are 0, 1.5, and then 2 and 2. So we did do 4 years on this, where we've had some 4 years at the beginning. Most of the contracts we negotiated in the middle were 3-year, and due to them accepting a 0% the first year, we did do 2 2-year contracts with this group. I did put a note in here. The grievance process, it's a lot of red on there. It's not as involved as it looks. If we would have gone line by line, there would have been a lot of things that weren't changed, but it was just easier in this case. We basically adopted most of it out of the teacher's contract, and to try to get some similarities between the grievance processes, we just redlined all the old stuff out and put the new stuff in. So it's not as significant of a change as it might look.
And then we have the integration specialist contract that's going to move down to informational. And the last resolution we'll have potentially on our board meeting next week is the approval of a school board member by the district for employment. I think we've already discussed that quite well and understand it. Any further conversation needed on that?
It's just a matter of having the whole committee.
All right.
What I will say, I'll just add on there on the ISPECS contract, I believe they met today with the whole group to kind of go over the contract. Their negotiating team, we basically have the tentative agreement between us, but they want to be able to explain what they came up with. This is a new contract from scratch. And it will end up being for 2 years. So it'll be for the 18-19 school year and the 19-20 school year. And we're using last year as a base, so which would essentially be a 0% increase. So.
Then I believe the last item we have on our agenda today is the approval of the superintendent evaluation plan. So I'll kick it over to one of the members of that committee. Oh, sorry, Member Leffler.
Yeah, I had a question about the integration
Yes, thank you.
specialist. Thank you for working with them to give them the time needed. I know from being a part of negotiating a first contract a few years ago with a union, I was a part of that. It's really important that they have the time. So I had a question, though. Do they have a date scheduled for voting on it?
I believe they set that today. I think today was the first day they brought them all together in a room and handed out. And then from that, I think they were going to answer any questions everybody had and then set a date to vote on.
Because you had said that this would go into effect this fall, so.
Correct. It'll go into effect in August, but their first, well, we probably you won't approve it as a board probably until September now. Okay. But it will go retro to August. Okay. So, and I believe their first week is the week before the teachers come back or 2 weeks before the teacher come back.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. Chair. I had one other question about something earlier on the agenda, and do you want me to do that now before we jump into the next item?
Great,
okay,
yep.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Back to the listings, there was a new position at Homecroft, a .5 reading specialist. So there hadn't been that position in the past at Homecroft, or it was in the certified appointments?
Correct. Elizabeth, I believe the Mayu right there, three-quarters of the way down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't replacing, it's a new position. It's paid for with their dollars.
Okay, excellent. And she came from Stowe. She'll be an
Correct.
Excellent addition. Thank you.
Although I think she's going to be moving on to another site.
She's good no matter where she'll be at. Okay.
In our district, however, yes.
Can I ask a couple quick questions about something before we go into the superintendent's evaluation piece too?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So looking at the collective bargaining agreement for the clerical workers, do we have a financial projection of what that is going to, what the financial differential is between the previous contract and this contract?
We can put one together. I don't have one. It was usually, we've had the finance people, put that together in the past, but we can certainly get something together on that.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then are the numbers in the budget that we're going to be talking about for the business committee, are they based on the new numbers under this new collective bargaining agreement or the old contract?
No, they would be based on the new numbers because that would be our projections out. We knew what the board parameters were.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, if we could see those numbers, that would be great. And then just going back to the employment piece, can we get an update on CFO? Where we're at with that, please?
It was, we had posted it for 2 weeks and then decided to leave the posting up until filled. And there was another candidate that entered, and we're hoping to do interviews early next week with 4 candidates. So we'll be looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll have some strong candidates.
Great. Thank you for that. And I just want to reiterate, and I know I shared this with you after one of our last board meetings too, but to be sure to ask them what their background is in contracts, because I think that's an opportunity for improvement for us.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that and ask about who's involved in the hiring and if you could outline the process.
Generally, we have a team, and we make sure that that's a balanced team between genders and cultures and positions. So we try to have district and building staff involved with that. And generally, we have some draft questions that we start with and then send it out to all the committee members, get feedback on that. Very often have an additional question or two or some different wording for questions based on that feedback. And then we hold the interviews and the team makes a recommendation from there.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any further questions? Member Oswald, thanks.
Do you have a sense of where these candidates are coming from? Are they within the state or outstate kind of thing?
All the candidates are from within the state. I believe 2 of them are serving other school districts at the time. If I go any further, I'll probably be oversharing. So,
Member Lafayette.
Yeah, just a general comment. I appreciated you giving us an update on that process in your weekly report last Friday or whatever day I read it, but I think you sent it Friday. Yeah.
If nothing further, we'll go on to the superintendent evaluation. Member Trinka.
Thank you. So I think actually I'll maybe turn it over to you, Superintendent, to walk through this. I appreciate you sending this out. I'm trying to find the tab that has it in. To just kind of just I guess basically as a reminder, Member Oswald and Chair Kirby and myself worked on this with Superintendent Gronseth on the evaluation. And we came up with 3 different goals for him. One was the utilization of the equity accountability tool that we approved last month or the month before to ensure its utilization for a variety of decisions that we're making across the district. The second was following up in the Office of Human Rights, is that right? Thank you. On really focusing on the disproportionate out-of-school suspensions for students of color and for students who are receiving free and reduced lunch. And then the third was one of the big ones for a personal and professional development goal for the superintendent was around him completing his dissertation. And I believe you were going to submit your thesis for approval by the end of August. Is that correct? That's the initial timeline, at least?
it was
Next week. So to have that done by the end of June of next year, correct? So it's coming around. It's going to come up quicker than we thought. So I appreciate you sending out your the summary of these the other day. I don't know if you have any other comments before we move into questions, or if Member Oswald or Chair Kirby have anything else to add.
I don't really have too many comments other than I used MSBA template that they provided in their superintendent evaluation training, and made a sheet that could be used for scoring this, and the steps that I have in here for the OSS are based on there it is. Based on the goals that we had set for the OSS agreement, and that goes through the year 2024 to 2025, and we've stepped that out by percentages based on each year. So that's where those numbers are coming from.
So I guess the clarifying question that I have, and maybe it's just a matter of how we frame the actual document, is that it was, I think our impression as the committee was that there were going to be specific metrics tied to this. And so one of the troubles I know that we've had in the past with some of the superintendent evaluations is that it seems like we don't necessarily have all of the data that we can use to tie to the direct evaluation. And so maybe for the next draft, I would ask that there be some metrics tied to, how do we know if some of these just seem a little, there's some, I think, vague. It's just a little bit vague between 1, 2, 3, and 4 for some of these. And I know that you had part of the delay for putting this on the agenda sooner was that you were going to reach out to folks within your teams to help you identify what some stretch goals were, or what would be kind of, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, Member Oswald and Chair Kirby, but that we were going to tie some direct numbers to this so that we could. work to measure them in a way that was a little bit less subjective.
Well, the OSS goal, when it says progress target, it's referring to the numbers on this sheet that we shared. Whoops, I thought it was up there.
It's on ours.
It's spinning. On this sheet that had the specific percentage targets, and those are the targets that are referred to on the evaluation sheet.
No, I understand that, but, like reasons were met for some student groups for the satisfactory for goal number 2. How are we defining some? And met for all and then exceeded all.
Okay.
Maybe I'm overthinking this, but I think if we're going to use it publicly, then we might want to. And if these goals are through 2024 or 2025, what's realistic to move for 1 year at a time, so we're not holding you to goals that are 7 years out?
Right. And that's the yellow column is for next year. I was having, excuse me, the dilly bar is getting to me. I was having a hard time putting it on that scale when there's, several different groups, and so I wasn't sure how to do that. So if you have some thoughts on how to.
And I could very well be overthinking it. The other piece that I'm a little bit concerned about is making sure that when we're tracking students that we're not double counting, and I don't know if there's been any progress around how we're, because I know that's been an issue with data in the past.
Right. And these goals don't include the students receiving free and reduced price lunch or receiving special education, because otherwise they would be double counted. Because if a student is in they have to be in one of these groups, but they may also be in 2 other groups. If you have some ideas around that to help that get more specific, you can send them along or let me know.
Member Oswald.
Perhaps using number words instead of some, you could say half or a quarter, or some accountable measurement instead of just generic words. My question actually revolved around, I think this is really a good framework for a yearly evaluation, but we also talked about doing half-year evaluations and how those goals would look as in progress towards to the final one. So would we still use the sheet and say you're satisfactorily moving towards there? I mean, you could, we're not going to have a lot of data at midterms to evaluate goal number 2 anyway. So I don't really know how the midterm evaluation would look in this format. Does that make sense? I think we need to discuss how to evaluate halfway through.
MSBA did have a mid-year evaluation form. It was very general. Mm-hmm. It just said like goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and evidence of progress. And so there was an area for us to write in, like for goal 2, we could, because we're going to be looking at that data monthly, mm-hmm. I can say, compared to last year at this point, here's where we are. But it's pretty open. It's not as
right. I just wanted to make sure that there was still something, and I would like to see that and improve that so we can, I don't expect a finished product in goals are met or anything like that, but we want to encourage you in directions to be able to accomplish your goals. So, and we need to know how to do that with a different evaluation.
I'll send out that mid-year form too.
Member Sanstead.
Yeah. Thanks to those of you who worked on this committee and came up with this. My question is, I looked back at 2016 evaluation, which was the last one that I think we did. And it's a lot different. And I wondered if there are some, it was exhaustive, too much so, clearly. However, there were some good sort of broad questions that came in and some good opportunity for feedback. And so I'm wondering what your process was in terms of throwing all of that out and just narrowing it down to a 3-goal evaluation.
So I'll rely on my fellow committee members if I miss something here. But I think that when we discussed, we looked at the summaries of the last number of evaluations that have been and those are more based on the core competencies of a superintendent, correct? And so there are quite a bit of things on that list that are A, operationally based, which isn't our job, and B, there's a lot of information in there that we wouldn't have any direct understanding of whether or not the superintendent is doing A, B, C, D, or E, and so it was a way to kind of to pare that back. Second was we wanted something that was more measurable and a little bit less objective, because some of the evaluations that you've received in the past, and I think we agreed collectively as a committee, were invited more emotional responses than concrete responses. And the third reason was that we really wanted to align, given all that the superintendent already has on his plate, we wanted to narrow the focus of what he would be evaluated on based on what some of the clear-cut directions of the district were. And so we felt the equity tool, the out-of-school suspension piece, and then finish it, and then as a professional development goal, wanting to support ongoing progress for the superintendent as well. We thought that the dissertation piece would be a good fit. And I believe MSBA, based on the training that we went to, recommended 2 to 3 goals for the superintendent annually.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
Yeah, just a couple questions. I just wanted to know, was Mr. Swarovski involved with this process as well in any way? Okay. Do you have any general comments from an HR perspective, I guess? And so that's one of my questions. And then my comment, we've been throwing a lot out about the School Board Association training that some of us went to. I think most of us maybe have gone to it. And there's a lot of resources. And I guess before we vote on this, I just encourage us to all kind of review that information they provided, because I think it's just good thought-provoking on what we're voting on. So, okay.
And I'll comment specifically to the question about Mr. Swarovski being involved. Even though you're the director of HR, it's also a little bit of a tricky position because you report to the superintendent. And so MSBA actually recommends that the board work directly with the superintendent on establishing this plan so that it doesn't create any sort of potential conflict of interest or uncomfortable power dynamic.
I understand that. I just wanted to know if he had any input.
All right. Member Oswald.
I just wanted to follow up on Member Trinka's comments that, we really try to embrace what MSBA is recommending at this point, where you've picked 2 or 3 goals and a professional development goal. And we can change these goals every year with whatever focus we want to be on. And this is what's our priority this year and what we need our district to work on and focus on right now. And so next year it could look completely different. And I encourage us to, come up with ideas throughout the year that we can replace these with, because he's going to be done with his dissertation, hopefully. And so that we're going to have to find something else that he wants to accomplish professionally to replace that. So it's a blank slate each year, and I really encourage us to work together to decide what we want to evaluate him on the coming year. And this isn't by any means meant as a criticism of his skills. It's meant as how do we support him and get him to accomplish this, because we're part of this too. It's not just all him. We have to create an atmosphere where he can succeed too. So, and I hope we do that.
Well, thank you to the committee for working on that, and Superintendent. Did you have a final comment? Sorry, reaching there. Okay. With that, any further questions? Going, gone. All right. Member Trinka, I'm going to kick it over to you for the Business Committee.
Thank you, Member Gorham. All right. We will go ahead and start with the financial report as we welcome our friends to the table. So to kick it off, our June financials are going to be presented at next month's committee meeting. Is that correct, Superintendent? Or at a later date? Microphone.
When the audit is complete, that's when they do the June financials, because the fiscal year won't be closed out until then.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. Moving on to the approval of payment of claims. That was a separate attachment. Did anyone have? Oh, I'm sorry, Member Oswald.
I just had a comment on the financials, or a question, I guess, on page 5. The third item from the bottom is an MDE STEM grant of $49,655. I was just curious how we use that in our district.
That was a really new grant that was awarded in June of 2018. So they haven't done a lot with it, but Tom Albright is working on coordinating that with Myers-Wilkins and some of the other schools. And I know one of the issues they're providing transportation for different things. I don't have all the details on what they're going to do, but it's more or less working with the younger elementary students.
Is it going to be focused at Myers-Wilkins then?
No, it'll be district-wide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Just quickly ahead of that, the approval of payment of claims, that extra document that was attached. Anyone have any questions around that? Okay. Page 8, the investment transactions. Any questions there? I had a quick question about I appreciated you putting the comparison information in there so we could see where we are this year as opposed to last year. So you indicated that the ending investment balance as of a year ago was a little more than, well, almost $3 million more than where we're at now. Do we have a breakdown of, can you just speak anecdotally to what caused the reduction in that?
That, I think we have a little more in actual cash as opposed to investments right now, because we did get some funds in June, and we had invested them short term. They matured at the end of June, so they're not showing up in the investment program, and then we reinvested them in July.
Okay, so will we have a better understanding of what all of that means once we have?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what your question is. It's either in investments or it's in actual liquid cash, in what would be referred to as a checking account.
Mm-hmm.
So this reflects what's actually in investments in CDs or term series or federal bonds.
Okay. All right. Any other questions there? We're losing ice cream wrappers. All right, moving on to the policies, looking at policy 110, Duluth Public Schools website accessibility policy. Any questions or discussion? The website accessibility policy. I have a question under section 4 around I appreciate the changes that you all made after our last business committee meeting. I think this looks a lot more representative. Just triple checking that some of the changes that were made, again in section 4, and this is the underlined section, contact the superintendent's office by calling this number or by completing the online website accessibility complaint/request form. We're confident that that's 100% ADA compliant. Okay, thank you.
Question?
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I was on section 4, website accessibility concerns. I guess my question was, it says whether or not a formal complaint or grievance is made once the Duluth Public Schools has been notified of inaccessible content. That content will be immediately made available, and I'm not sure what immediately means. Within a week, a day? Immediately seems pretty fast. Maybe that's a legal
Immediately
thing
is
to worry about.
fast. Generally, we see something more like timely rather than immediate. We could certainly make that change if that's what you'd like to see. Yes?
I think
No?
timely or something, giving you a little wiggle room. Maybe you want to do it as quickly as possible, but immediate just seems like that day. I don't know.
So say
As soon as possible.
If that's, as soon as possible would be fine, yeah.
as soon as possible. Seems reasonable. Okay.
I just want to clarify, actually, and I forgot to mention this earlier. I spoke with the superintendent after our last business committee meeting, and as a way to try and streamline the asks that we have of district staff following these committee meetings, we're going to make a list of what it is that we're specifically asking, and then set some priorities and some timelines around that so that we can help ensure that we're not giving contradicting marching orders to the superintendent and to our staff. So with things like policy changes, that's maybe not quite as big of a deal, but for some of the other discussions that we'll have coming up later in the agenda, I think that might help save sanity for a lot of folks sitting around the table. So,
can I ask a question concerning that?
Of course.
Just a little bit of clarification. So I agree that I think helping our leaders know what we're asking, but is there some guidelines we want to give about the ask? So sometimes I feel like if one of us has an ask, is that really something the board really wants to see accomplished? If you ask, and it's not necessarily something that as a board we feel is a priority, then I feel like we've compromised, and that's another leadership conundrum. And so when we streamline at the end of the meeting what we've asked, I think that needs a board vote. Is that really what we want our leaders to spend some time? If it's just one of us that wants this or that, is that a fair direction for our board? They've been so kind at doing when I've said, hey, can I have this? But I don't necessarily feel it's something that we should be. I just want clarification.
Sure.
Can we do? I would like it if we're asking for a specific thing, that comes to a board vote as to whether or not we want to require that. That also holds them accountable. If it's just one of us, even in the streamline, what takes priority when they have a lot to do?
so we can't vote during a committee meeting. So I think what I'm proposing is that we keep a list of what it is that we're asking for, and then at the end of the meeting we recap the list so everyone's clear, because people are asking one-offs of the administration and of folks anyways via email or telephone or during in-person meetings, and then we can kind of say, like, what is the priority on this, just so that we can help. I'm trying to help support direction and prioritization with an already overtaxed administration team.
As well as I am.
Yeah.
I feel like at times we throw out asks I don't think it's moving us to a vision, which then kind of triples into some other things about, I would love to have an opportunity to workshop with my board members to know what I want and ask to be furthering our vision as a board. So if we're going to ask for some data or for some report that I hope that we have a vision at the end of our 4-year term of why we've asked that, or even in the next 3 months vision. I don't know. I just feel like I would love to see us talk about what our priorities are so that when we ask that.
If I could, I think the term "ask" is the thing. People ask for clarification on agenda items and things, and that's, I completely understand that. You're looking for clearance. Where we get a little bit confused is if we're having conversations, and let's say this policy, where I can't remember who asked about immediately, but and then there's a suggestion, maybe this word, and so I think that's the direction we're going, that we're going to replace that word, but I don't necessarily hear from everybody. So I think, was that, does the board as a whole want to go in that direction, or is it, I don't know if it's a nod around the table or something about agreement of, I think that's a good idea, and maybe that's too simple of a example, but maybe if things come up later in the meeting that I go, this is one of them, maybe that will help.
I think a good way to do that is to ask for clarification at the time. Like you've just expressed, do we want to go with timely or is immediately okay? I'm okay with either. So yeah, that's my opinion. But asking us to raise our hands or give thumbs up, I fear that could be viewed as a vote too, which we're not supposed to vote as a committee. But everything's debatable. My question revolved around that section 4 about who will be immediately or timely providing that information. Have we identified a staff person, or is it a department, or who's the ultimate person responsible for making that happen once you're notified?
Well, it would come to my office,
right? And
depending on what portion of the website it may be a different person. That's why we put designee.
Okay. I was just making sure we had people aware that we're changing their jobs.
Member Leslie-Kemp?
Yeah, actually in the section 5, it does say the superintendent or the designee. I think that's what you're referring to, right, Superintendent? Thank you for changing the wordage to caregiver, or adding that wordage as well. I didn't want to go kind of too far off the trail of the conversation that was happening over here a few minutes ago, but I do have, I guess, 2 cents I want to add, is that I think it's another conversation we need to have, and it's more than just the list that's made with the discussions here, but I think it's also the ask that we're doing by email, the ask, and when it's sometimes more than just informational. And I have some real concerns about those asks as well, and the amount of time, or do we all agree with those asks? So I would like to have a longer discussion, not here, but on that, because I'm very concerned about that.
Did you have anything to add, Member Sandstead?
I was just going to say, in terms of asks that are happening in a meeting, I think as board members we're responsible for speaking up if we disagree or have a problem with an ask. And so I think that to Member Lofald's point, that individual asks can be viewed as asks from the team unless somebody speaks up, is, I think, a good, easy way to maintain a record.
And this may not be a perfect process for the first few times we try it. And so I appreciate, as always, the discussion around this. We're looking for ways to streamline and to reduce confusion and to help. So likely won't be perfect this month, but we'll keep finessing it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we can scrap it and try something new. But for the meantime, I think it hopefully will be a helpful process. Any other discussion around that particular policy? All right. Any discussion around policy 701, establishment and adoption of school district budget? Member Sandstead?
Yes, I was wondering if we should include a deadline for the preliminary budget. That is paragraph 3A. Because we have one for the actual, July 1, and we've kind of talked in the last few months in particular about sort of scaffolding the budget process with more precise expectations. So I thought I'd raise that as a possibility to put in March 1, April 1, something like that as a preliminary budget deadline.
I like the idea of having a deadline date. It becomes challenging on funding years because the legislative session isn't over yet. So we would have an estimate by then. And we usually will build a preliminary with our best guess about where the legislature's headed. We were wrong this year, by the way, just about how it was all coming together at the end. But so I'd want the date to, or maybe something in there about, I don't know, to recognize that the legislature hasn't made their rulings yet or passed a budget. That,
yeah.
Although you'd still have a preliminary.
We still have the preliminary every year by around mid-March, right?
Yep, it would just be changed then, and it would be anyway. So,
and it's just sort of knowing the difference between a preliminary and an off year versus a legislative year. There are going to be more changes from preliminary to final. Okay. So, do we think, Superintendent, would you suggest March 1 or April 1 as the deadline we should include?
I think April 1 is more realistic to have it fleshed out enough to come to the board. My hope would be that I'm working on it in March and zeroing down on numbers in March to be able to present in April.
Member Oswald?
I know that there are some school districts that start their budgeting process in January. Okay, he said we do too. So are there parts that we can start seeing earlier? If we break our budget up into what we can do and what we can sign off on in the chunks, or is it just much easier to do it all at once?
Well, the general fund, which is the largest part and the most changeable part, is all based on our enrollment projections. So it's really about getting the enrollment projections down and being able to set our budget from there, because that's the biggest piece. So in January, that's when we start doing the projections for the coming year. And then in February, our students are registering for classes, and so we know how many of different levels of teachers, how many social studies teachers and math sections and English sections, and we figure all of that out so that we can see what our staffing changes are going to be and the budget implications with all of that. So it's, when we are doing our enrollment projections, that's probably the biggest piece. Most of our other numbers are coming in about that time. We know our comp ed. numbers for the coming year. And then as those reports start coming out, we get closer and closer. We do continue to monitor our enrollment numbers every month. You know, that's the APUs that you look at, and we're using that to build out on that enrollment projection. So that's why as we get closer to the end of the year, we feel like we're closer to what our real numbers are going to be based on the changes we're seeing in enrollment throughout the year. So, you know, we can share what our enrollment projections are at that time, knowing that, you know, it does shift from month to month as we go. But do you have thoughts on that, Peggy?
My only thought on that is if we're going to break it down in sections, the revenue piece is probably the first thing, and that is driven by the enrollment projections, so it kind of feeds into one after another, and so it's hard to get the expenses out until we present the information to the principals and have them give us their feedback as to what their plans are.
Could I follow up again?
Yeah.
If you remember, in February, we brought a report to you that said, here's all the revenues for the district. We met with our QSEs and the QLTs at the same time, and that was based on the revenues that we were projecting. So we do a bit of that piece at a time. But
Member Lesserkamp?
Yeah, just clarification and question. I believe at least the 4 years before I've been on the board, we have done the preliminary budget at the March meeting. Does that sound right, Peggy and Bill? And at least for the last 5 years or so? I should have looked that up, but I didn't.
I think it was March when we had the considerations. I don't know that we called it a preliminary budget, but we did. That's when we had the considerations.
And so just kind of clarifying to something you said about getting feedback from, say, QSC and our other staff stakeholders, does that still give the time if we were to put a date on it? Okay, thank you.
Member Sandsted?
Yeah, my other suggestion is in the final budget, they've got some sort of soft language about, or it's 3D, talking about where is it? Something, you know, about the reasons behind the budget. It's in there somewhere, but they don't have it on preliminary. And so I thought that it might be a positive addition to include in 3A in the preliminary. Probably just at the end there, some statement that the budget is necessary to carry out the education program within the revenues projected, but also to be consistent with board established priorities and reflect the mission and values of the 709 community. So in 3A, I'm trying to add some context to the budget to say we don't just want revenues and expenditures. We want expenditure plan based on board established priorities and the mission and values of our district. So an intentional budget.
Without voting, I would fully support us codifying, getting the preliminary budget, you know, even if we're not giving a date, but 90 days out or 60 days out of the final approval, whatever that is, so that might give us a little bit of different flexibility. And I think also articulating the priorities of the preliminary budget and maybe not as fleshed out as in the final budget, but I think that would also help us coalesce around strategic direction for the district in the coming year. Member Lofeld?
So are we looking at 3 requirement A, to put it there? And then would we have to adjust this language every year that we are rebudgeting? If we put in there our specific values and goals and our mission, then when we have different goals for the next budget year, to go back and change this language? That's one of my questions. The second question is, I'm just a little discombobulated from last night because I can't find but is this a brand new policy? Because I don't see any lines out. So we've never had a policy because I don't see any lines out like this is a revised policy. I know that this is a Minnesota School Board Association budget policy. Have we not had one before?
We have. It's down below. It's one of the deleted policies.
So it's all down below this one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to answer your first question about including goals and priorities, my thought is not to specifically enumerate them, but to just say that they are consistent with. And that would hopefully prompt us to say, oh yeah, what are our goals and priorities this year? And is this consistent with it? That was my thought.
Got it. Thank you.
Chair Kirby?
Can I talk? I think what Member Sandstead saying that the budget is probably not going to be the same from year to year. There are going to be changes. So what's the context for those changes? Why are we making them, and how do they fit with our general goals? Yeah. So they could change from year to year just because the budget does.
I was just going to say this is a first reading of this. So sometimes when you see the second reading and people have suggested changes, that's when you see the strike through because we're changing what was there. And so next time you'll see some red writing with some added words.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that?
I just have a couple of comments on the deleted ones, if we're ready to move on.
Can we just move on? Can we just go down through the order of the pages, just to, if you could hold that thought so we don't get lost. There's a lot in this one. Modification of school district budget, 701.1. Any discussion there? That's page 15 and 16. Okay. Anything around 702, the accounting policy? All right. So then we go down to the deleted policies. So we're looking at 3005. Member Sandstead?
First, I have a question. This one is currently controlling 3005, and it references Board Policy 3017. And I couldn't find that. And so I'm assuming we already deleted that one. At least it wasn't on the website. So that was just a question. Is 3017 still a policy we have in existence? And if it is, then we should probably delete that also at this point. And if it's already been deleted, well, then we probably should have figured out a reference to that previously, but that's fine. This policy that we're looking at deleting, 30005, page 19, also requires sites to have a team of staff and parents/citizens for their site budgets. And I like that idea, and I don't think that's incorporated in 300 whatever we're looking at implementing. So I'm wondering if we want to include that provision in the school district budget, or if we want to have, if we're going to have a separate discussion regarding site budgets, or if that just shouldn't be in the policy. I kind of think it is a policy level thing to say, here's how a site is going to establish its budget.
Superintendent?
And this is sometimes where budget reflects the practice of the time. They had site teams, and site-based management was the focus of the time. Right now, we're with our continuous improvement teams, and they're deciding how to use the discretionary funds, and they're creating the record of continuous improvement to show how they're measuring progress based on those funds. So I'm wondering if it's more of a regulation than in the policy, based on that it kind of changes which team it is. But I'd be open to having that in the policy too. But I know from being a teacher at the time that it was more than discretionary that they were working with at the time. So it was just a different model. But I like the idea of having the input for the site budgets.
Do you have a follow-up to that?
I do. Is this related, Member Oswald? Go ahead.
I was a member of site teams at MacArthur when my kids were little, and it really depends on who your principal is as to how effective you are. Mm-hmm. When I started there, we had a principal that walked in and handed us stacks of papers and said, "How do you want me to spend our budget?" And we as a group with teachers and people hashed it out and how it would look and what it looked and what our values are and all those kinds of things. Then the next principal came along, and this person came in and sat down and told us what they were doing. And we all went, "Oh, okay." So, and both ways qualified as having community and parent engagement. So there would need to be a standard of how that would look and what the expectation is. But I firmly agree that perhaps some language should be included that, community and parent involvement is to be expected at a site level or per building or something like that. Something that allows them to know that we want outside people giving their opinions to the stakeholders within that school. I think it's very, very pertinent to budget.
It seems to me that how sites set their budget should be in policy, but that we can structure it in such a way that it can be flexible with perhaps changing times if we're not doing CIT-based budgets in a couple of years. We wouldn't, So, right. So I would like to see some inclusion of parameters around site budgets so that we've got some consistency and accountability across the district. But it doesn't have to be too specific. It's in 3005, and it's the second to last paragraph.
It's the last sentence of the
So I'm not
penultimate
necessarily
paragraph.
attached to that language, but I want to include something about how sites are going to set budgets. Yeah.
Maybe this is that we need a separate policy about school building budgets versus school board approved budgets. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me it could be a little more detailed rather than a couple sentences on how we want it. But either way would work. But I could see people saying, "What does that have to do with what the school board does with their budget?" Because we don't oversee individual budgets. Mm-hmm. We do the whole revenue and expenditure thing.
Member Loeffler-Kemp?
Yeah, just a clarification. Is there some language I thought there was in the continuous improvement teams about involvement in the budget? I thought that was discussed in our earlier meetings. And then just kind of for history, just like Member Oswald, I was on my site council, a couple different ones. And at that time, site council had funding so that they had funding to host the many meetings that site councils had and to pay a stipend, pay childcare, things like that. So there's kind of a budget item that we should think about if we're also going to set that expectation, or at least at the time that's how it was set up. I don't have all the numbers on it, but I recall that. So,
Member Lofeld?
Yeah, just piggybacking off of all of this too. I do remember now that there was there must have been budget, because I sat on site council as well as a teacher rep, and the parents had childcare, and there was sometimes meals provided because most of the site meetings were after school, which, is something as a board we want to look at as we move forward with what we think a continuous improvement team will look like. What my question would be that I'm not so sure I want that ask in this policy, but I want to make sure it's in a policy. And I would think that somewhere in our policies we're going to get to, I would think we might have to craft a new site continuous improvement team document, policy, I don't know, something. Help me out, principal, assistants, and superintendent. I mean, as a school board, I think we have been really passionate about allowing our community to have input at the site levels, especially those that are getting comp ed. And I think that's where this is coming from, that we want something reflective in policy that is at least reflective of our vision and our goals. But I don't know if it's here that I think it should be.
Can I just point out?
Yeah.
We have an 800 series that is for building and sites, and so perhaps we need a policy there. Right now, it's not showing me any of those policies. Could be something in our new website, but maybe that's something we can look at for the next couple months down the road.
Member Gore?
I'm supportive of this general language suggestion because I think it reflects the values we agreed to when we passed the resolution supporting the tool for education equity. It helps ensure that it's putting equity into policy. Health in all policies, equity in all policies. That's what this language would strive to do. So I think that's important to do.
I have a quick question also about 3005 around that board policy 3017. The second paragraph says district administration shall maintain a general fund undesignated reserve as required by board policy 3017. I don't see any of that language around maintaining a general fund undesignated reserve in the new policy, and wondering if there's a reason why MSBA has taken that out.
I don't know. I know that most districts do have a policy for how much they would like to see in reserves. So, and I think that, was it 701? Is that what that number is? That seems like the right place for that to exist.
I would just want to make sure that we're following state statute around wanting to, so maybe if we could do a little bit of research to see if that needs to be included in the new policy so that I know that's been a contentious issue. Go ahead.
I'd like to go back to policy 701 and point something out that I think we should talk about anyway. It's in section 3, paragraph D. It's kind of in the middle of the paragraph, and it talks about the school district shall publish its adopted revenue and expenditures for the current year and the prior year. And it says within 1 week of the acceptance of the final audit by the school board or November 30, whichever is earlier. However, the MDE's final date for submitting electronically data is November 30th. The school board typically does not approve the audit until December. So I'm wondering if we want to change that term earlier to later. I don't know if we want to have published data before it's accepted by the school board.
I have a thought on that. Perhaps we could change that by November 30th to, or earlier to, by our December monthly meeting. Would that make sense? I mean, that our December board meeting, because that way you would ensure that we're always accepting it by December and that that's when people can expect it. I would rather have somebody know when to come to us than be like, is it November 30th or when did they get it? Or, maybe they got it done in October, and now they already released it, and I missed it. This would give a concrete date, and I'm all about concrete at this moment in policy.
My question is, so we're getting these model policies from MSBA, and they're flawed out of the gate. And so do we have a process or a mechanism? I really appreciate you reminding us of that. Do we have a process or a mechanism to work with MSBA to say, if we're going to be using these as templates, how do we give you feedback? Because that's just a flaw. It's flawed, right? So
I know they're very open to feedback on the policies. We let them know when we're changing some things or if we see an error, and they're very happy to receive that feedback. My guess is they're looking at statute, and statute says, well, you have to have this by November 30th, so it must be in there. Either that or MDE is changing their dates. But I know they're open to receiving feedback when we give it to them.
I would support your proposed change to that, to be reflective and respective of staff and data integrity. Or December committee meeting, because we'd need to look at it at the committee meeting before a board meeting, right? That's true.
We don't accept it till December. So.
That's right, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Member Sandstead?
If we're going to keep moving forward, I had a comment on 3010, which I'm scrolling here.
Page 20.
Yeah, page 20. This just seemed to include information that perhaps might need to be continued in the new policy or a new policy somewhere. Although not totally accurate in that in no event will significant expenditure be made without prior approval of the appropriate school board committee. Well, we don't, as committees, approve significant expenditures, but yeah. So it seems to me that the parts of these that are still relevant should perhaps be continued rather than just wholeheartedly deleted. Same thing with the next one, 3015 on page 21.
Which specific section of 3015?
Well, like number 2, the superintendent shall provide the appropriate data to the State Department of Education to obtain foundation aid and other special aids. I think all of them. Probably. It's hard because I don't think these are necessarily specifically stated in statute, but at the same time, they're kind of obvious. Yes, we should give the information necessary to the state so that they will give us revenue. Same thing to the feds. But at the same time, we had it as policy, and it is things that we should do. Do we need to continue it in policy? I guess. I would default by saying maybe we should, but I don't know.
I think part of this was based on the way schools were financed in the state. Didn't it change about that time? It's obvious we should, yeah.
My thought would be, do we need a policy for it, really? And I think if you go back to the 3100, I think, is that the one? Nope, I went the wrong way. The budget control, that is in another policy. We've talked about that earlier. Yes? That's in a policy that we've already hashed out. That stipulation, that information in this budget control is in a policy we...
Okay.
When we talked about signing authority.
And caps, I think, too, right? So. Do we have addressed elsewhere something around the that first section of 3015, the local funds around the directing the county auditor to levy the necessary funds? Do we have that listed somewhere else?
I'd have to look to know for sure, but I'm torn with these three because they are requirements, and of course we're going to meet the deadlines by the state. But then again, I don't know. It's illegal to steal stuff, but it's still in the law. So I don't know that it's completely necessary. If MSBA didn't include it, then I don't know. Maybe it's not a necessary thing, and I'm seeing Sally smile because they missed another thing on just that prior policy. But we can certainly just renumber that policy too if you felt like the whole needed to remain. You could renumber it to be in the 700s.
Or could we just add it to one of the ones that we have already to Member Lofald's point, so we're not, because we have so many policies as it is. Yeah, so then the policy will be 3 pages instead of 2.5 pages, maybe. But
it might be simple to just add a revenue segment to 700 and say, here's what we're going to do to get our revenue, and it's just those 3 things from the income policy.
Member Oswald?
Do we have a policy or regulation surrounding how we obtain grant funding? Because that seems to me where this would go. Because it's about getting grants, obviously. Revenue. And item number 2 about state funds, I view that more as a duty of the superintendent, and I know we have that policy somewhere. I don't know that that has to be included in it, but if we're going to move it anywhere, I think that's where it should go. But number 1 and number 3, I mean, it's really, they talk about 2 different things. Number 3 is much more about how do we get federal aid. And, of course, whatever you're going to apply for from the federal government, you're going to come to us for approval. I mean, that's kind of like no-brainer. I would like to know that we're applying for federal aid. I mean, that just happens naturally in our regulations of how we do things. So is this a policy? I'm not sure. Is it a regulation? Probably. But to me, I'm not married to having to have it in writing. I could see this going away just fine. When it was created in 1970, that's nearly 50 years ago, education looked a lot different then. So, and they didn't know about email and computers and that sort of stuff. So, a click of a button, you get it there. So,
Not sure what our order here is, but I think you're up next.
I was just going to point out that I think number 1 on that deletion is covered in 701, Section 2. It talks about general statement of policy, and the policy of the school district is to establish its revenue and expenditure budgets in accordance with the applicable provisions of law. And I think our levy and those types of things are covered by state statutes of deadlines and when you have to have those that information to the county.
I would agree with that.
That's a good clarification. Yeah. Superintendent?
Gosh, I was listening so intently, and that comment about 1970 stung a little bit, and I know what I was going to say. When we were talking about this at agenda setting, they mentioned that these particular policies had a lot of cross-references, and they were trying to find the ones that had to absolutely be together. I'm wondering if we looked at some of the other cross-connections that were on that list, if we're going to find any of these pieces. So we'll look into that again too, and maybe have to come back with a few other attachments, because some of these budgets, when we go to, or policies, when we go to change them, it's connected to so many across the board. So we'll look at that too.
Thank you. Any other discussion around 3015 or 3050? 3015. Anything around 3100, classification of expenditures? 3105, periodic financial reports? 3110? All right. Perfect. Thank you. How you keep all of that, Peggy, in your head is beyond me. But I'm certainly thankful for it. Having that institutional knowledge is really important. Moving on to contracts, change orders, and leases. The first contract for A1, the Head Start Mental Health Consultant Agreement, starting on page 25. Any questions or discussion there?
Is this coming out of the Head Start budget?
Yes, and this is an agreement that we renew every year, just how they're required to do it with their grant.
And just as a clarification with that one too, is this a full-time position? Is this a full-time position?
I'm not sure. I believe it is. It might be a little less than full-time.
Okay. Peggy, do you know? Okay, missed it.
I think it's on an as-needed basis, and the consultant bills us for whatever time they spend with specific students.
Okay, thank you.
It's students and families too, I believe, not just students.
Okay. Moving on to resolutions, we have an acceptance of donations. Any questions there? All right, here comes the grand event, the fiscal year 2019 budget.
That 40 pounds of bananas is approximately 300 bananas.
That's a lot of bananas.
That's also my donations. Yeah. 600 cake towels.
Microphone, please. Your microphone.
I'm surrounded by technology. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Is it warm in here? We are talking about the 2019 modified budget tonight. You have the budget in your packet, and this presentation is really a summary of that document. And Peggy, please feel free to jump in at any time. First, I just wanted to kind of show this graphic because I think it's a great visual way to see how we spend our money. They always say if you want to know someone's values, look at where they're spending their money. And the green area is our student services. That's instruction and student support, and that represents 77.6% of the budget. The yellow section is building operations at 14.2%. That is things like heat and energy and things that we do, plowing the driveways, shoveling the sidewalks, that kind of thing to take care of the building. District supports, that's services like HR, payroll, transportation, that represents 4.5% of the budget. And then district and site administration, so that includes cabinet level staff, but it also includes principals, assistant principals, clericals, costs that it takes to run the offices at our schools. That represents 4.5% of the budget. Again, just to review the parameters we used for planning the budget. We always want our focus to be our students. We want the largest chunk to be on instruction and support that directly affects our students and their learning and the teaching that's going on in classrooms. And we're focused on the world's best workforce goals. The 5 areas: kindergarten readiness, having all students read well by grade 3, closing the achievement gap, raising the graduation rates, and having all of our students be college and career ready. That's the focus of our state, and the focus of all of our work is to make progress in these 5 goal areas. Our main strategies that we've really been focused on is a multi-tiered system of support. You might hear us talking about MTSS a lot. That really means focusing our efforts on the data our students are showing us, so we can individualize our instruction more. Professional learning communities are about improving our instruction based on the needs of our students. So our teachers, our teams are coming together, they're looking at their assessment data, they're looking at how our students are doing on their standards, and changing their instruction based on that information. So that and multi-tiered systems of support really go together. And then working on our school culture and climate. We were just talking about our goals with decreasing disproportionate out-of-school suspensions, and that's going to be where our focus is on that goal this year. As you know, we brought in ARC to review our budget, and that was a really good experience. It was very, very helpful for them to look over everything with us. They reported that everyone they worked with at the district knew their budgets really well, and that they enjoyed working with us, and perhaps we could work together again in the future. They did help us to find that we had overestimated our revenues in 3 different areas. One was our enrollment projections in 2 grade levels were a bit higher than they found. Our special education, we found that there were some additional changes that needed to be made in that area. By the way, it's next week that I am going to testify at the Senate E12 Policy Committee regarding our special education funding. And then another area that was overestimated was some county apportionments and some changes that we needed to make there. On the expenditure side, they found some areas by running through historical data that there are some areas that we could budget less for based on the amount that we budgeted and the actual comparison over time, and then some areas that they suggested increasing the budget in based on our historical expenditures. The net findings of those was $1.9 million in adjustments that we needed to make. So we needed to decrease our expenditures by $1.9 million. To do that, we scoured the budget. Peggy spent a lot of time with ARC going over each item, going over budgets with each of our departments. One of the things that we were able to do, we have a federal trust that over time builds up. So it's based on our federal employees that are paid for by federal funds. And each year we put money away to pay for things like, I want to say OPEB, but it's severance, insurance, things like that. And over time we put away more than we use, and so it tends to build up. And right now there is enough money in there so that we can increase our insurance payment from the federal trust rather than the general fund. And so that would be $1.2 million that we're able to do that. And then, we'll start building that account up again over time. In special education, we went through and figured our actuals compared to the budget, which we need to do in special education anyway. And we were able to make some changes based on that. Each year, our student needs change depending on graduations or students moving in or out of the district or changes to their service models. And so we updated our services based on that. And then they were able to make some adjustments based on historical expenditures. An example of those areas would be paraprofessionals sub-budget, so a budget to bring in people when people are gone. There's a couple of different things going on there. One, we've had a very difficult time finding substitute paraprofessionals, and so we haven't spent that budget. We'd love to find more subs, but over time it's just shown that we've over budgeted there because we haven't been able to fill those spots. So that's one example of an area that they made an adjustment like that. The whole of special education budget is about $22 million, so $400,000 in the scope of $22 million isn't a huge percentage change for that budget. We are also able to identify an additional $200,000 in LTFM, that's long-term facilities maintenance funding. Rather than come from general fund, some of our staff and projects will come from LTFM funds that were available in this year's budget. That too would be a one-time shift. And then various different district level budget adjustments of $100,000. That might be, $5,000 here, $10,000 here, just different areas where each department scoured over their budgets and found where they could make some reductions, whether that's in your postage budget or your PD budget or anywhere that we could identify where we could make some reduction, we did. All of that comes up to $1.9 million. That's the goal that we needed to get to present the balanced budget to you. Looking at the categories that we've shared before for the budget from the adopted to the modified. So what you adopted was the preliminary budget. So this is changes that you're seeing between the preliminary budget and the modified budget by category. Questions?
Member Oswald?
I have 3 questions. When did we know about the federal trust before, and why didn't we utilize that in previous years?
It has been in all the financial reports and the budgets. It's listed separately as a separate fund. It's called Trust Agency Fund. We've been building that up, and it's just in the last few years that it's gotten to be a very sizable number. Part of the growth in there is from interest too. It's not just everything we've transferred over. So it was one area we were able to look at this year as something we could utilize, and As I pointed out, it is a one-time thing, so it's not something you can count on every year.
Right. But in my 3 years on the board, we've had deficits every year, and so I'm just curious why we haven't looked at this as an option, or has it been considered and taken off the table?
It's been thought about and not actually brought forward to the public. We would certainly have done that to keep us out of statutory operating debt.
Okay. And so reallocating $200,000 out of the LTFM plan, what is coming out of the plan that's not going to be covered now? Is this, we just approved the 10-year plan and we know what's happening next year. And so I just am curious what's not going to be done now.
Projects will still continue to be done, but the statute allows us to charge compliant maintenance projects to the plan. So, for example, we might have I'm just making something up here, a tile failure in a classroom and it's $5,000. I mean, we didn't plan that. We didn't put it in the LTFM plan, but I can charge that $10,000 to the LTFM fund. And what that $200,000 will do is it's going to impact the carryover that would go into next year. And the carryover is always impacted. It's never the same because the numbers that you approved are never exactly accurate. When we go out for bids, it might be 100 or 200,000 high or low, so that number is always fluctuating. And we do have carryover going into this year, so there is flexibility to charge small projects to LTFM, but it's not a practice we would want to continue because, as you suggested, the more we charge to LTFM of maintenance type projects, the less we're doing of the bigger projects. So the salary shift is temporary and this $200,000 shift is temporary, but it's compliant and it's a method to help us.
So the $200,000 isn't taking away any of the bigger projects?
Nothing that we've planned this year, no.
Okay. And the last thing, I guess, is just a comment, because I look at your list and I understand your list, but I still lack detail of what and where these cuts are. And I can't count the number of times that people talk to me and tell me that they were told that the school board directed this cut or this thing or this, this negotiation, whatever it is. And I have no knowledge of it because I don't see that in this one-page document. And that's a really large frustration of my job looking at a budget. I would really like to know when I am making cuts that impact people and impact things and what those are, not necessarily to micromanage them, but to take ownership and responsibility for them. Because right now I'm taking ownership and responsibility of cutting $1.9 million and I don't necessarily know how. And I'm not okay with that. Never have been. And I'm really frustrated by it.
Did you want to follow up on that, or can I ask a question?
I can. This is kind of one of those spots where we're kind of between directions, because we're asked to tell us what we're spending, bring us the budget and show us what we're spending, and don't just focus on what we're not spending. So, I've heard it two ways about, don't just bring us a list of what we're cutting, show us what we're spending. And so we've brought you the budget, which is on page 30 to 51, and I've tried to balance that with a summary of some changes that we've made without going into detail on each of those line item budgets.
May I respond? I'm not part of that conversation, so my voice isn't heard there. My only place that I have to be heard is right here. And when I'm being blamed for cuts that I don't know I'm making, that's where the problem is.
So do we have a sense of, I appreciate you putting together that summation presentation, that's helpful. Looking at this $1.9 million cut, Couple questions. How do we stack up in our percentages with 4.5% of our total general fund budget going towards district and school administration? Do we know what the average percentage is of other school districts of our size and how we compare?
We can get you that exact information. I know that we're pretty low in comparison to districts our size.
Okay, that's good. You don't have to get the specifics. And then do we have a sense of how this, and I apologize if I missed it somewhere in the documentation, of how is this going to result in anyone being laid off or not having a job?
No, these positions, some of the reductions that we were able to make are because those positions were being reduced. So if they're going from a 1.0 to a 0.8, we were able to count that as a reduction. So it's not that someone is getting a different assignment based on these changes, and there wouldn't be any layoffs based on these either.
Okay. Member Lofeld?
So I want to respond to Member Oswald's frustration at not always knowing exactly. We get emails about an orchestra hour being cut, and why is the board going to do that? And as a new board member, I'm still trying to I'm trying to read my manual, and I really do think it lies in, what is our job and what is our leadership, and we are giving leadership when we say, go ahead and we get the kind of general area that they're reducing. I think then it is their job to make the cuts because they're the ones that know those departments. They know it's also the principals' choices when they get their budget to do what they feel is best for their district. I think it is just the way that our job rolls is that we are going to be blamed for things that have been made decisions in specific buildings, and what we can share with our constituents is that we as a board give direction to our leadership, and they know best where the best cuts have to be. All of these cuts, like you just shared because of Member Trinka's question, come with the least impact to our students. And so our response to our constituents are that we are trusting our leadership to make cuts that won't impact instruction or students' learning as best they can. If we're going to come to a board meeting and then get nitpicky about you're cutting theater at Denfeld, well, I'm going to get all up in arms. And then all of our personal baggage comes into conversation here, which I don't think is always going to move us forward. And so I do believe that the budget, it is a big part of our vote. It seems like even in our campaigning, we were supposed to be the best financial board members that we can be. And sometimes I think we all hang our hat on trying to understand the budget, when I think there's so much more as a board we can be visioning and let our leadership that knows where it needs to go. We have time and again thanked our leadership that are sitting right here with what they've brought to us. And so I believe that they're going to continue to do that hard work. And we can ask individual questions. I would imagine if you stopped in and asked where does exactly the 23,000 in sped ed cut come from, or it's not that, I know that. But, you probably would get a response from our leadership. But I think as a board, our role, at least what I'm learning, is to let them do it, but we give them a guideline. And if we're really unhappy about it, well, then I think, we can workshop. And I'd like to suggest, too, that we do more workshopping around budget time.
And I will say that that's something that Peggy, and I'll let you follow up, that's something that Peggy and I talked about in May or June, is after we get through this process, starting to, at business committee meetings, walk through, okay, we're going to take this account this month and really dive into it. So we are going to start looking at that moving forward, right? Yeah. Member Oswald?
Just because we're provided information doesn't mean that it needs to be responded to. It's there as informational. And I personally don't like being yelled at by constituents for not providing them a teacher, or for unions coming to me and saying, but they said that the school board is demanding they not give this to us. When I'm not part of that conversation, it's all in the blame game, and I don't like that. I want to be able to say, well, that, yeah, we had to make a tough decision, and that was unfortunately on the short end of the stick. At least I knew it was coming, I could be prepared, but I'm being blindsided by a lot of different things that are being said in the community. What are we going to do about Homecraft, where almost every grade level is over 30 kids? I keep telling them, our administration is going to look at it, and I hope they can find a solution that can help some, because I know we can't solve it all. That's been my response. And yet, other people come to me saying that they were told that Homecraft can't get any more teachers because the board voted to not give them any more teachers. Well, is that in that budget or isn't it? That it's those kinds of things that I don't know what's contained within those cuts. Just because you're informing us of what those cuts are doesn't mean I get to, sit and say, oh no, oh no, oh no. I go, wow, that's a hefty thing that we got to do to stay focused on what we need to stay focused on. You've made a lot of assumptions in your talk towards me, and so I'm just trying to show you that I'm not the person that I felt you were talking to. Information is power, and I would rather be an empowered board to be able to support our leaders rather than go, what's going on? I shouldn't have to have yet another one-on-one conversation that we've already talked about, trying to lighten the superintendent's load from all of us. And yet you're just telling me I need to go talk to him more and tell me more and tell me what the special ed cuts were. Well, he could just give it to everybody and it'd all be good. And it would be done. So what he gives us is what we ask him to give us. Like he said, he thought what he was told is that we wanted to see it that way. And I'm the voice that says, I'd like more. And I'm not included in those pre-talks, so here I am going, please give me more. That's all it is. It's a simple request.
So I'll let the superintendent respond, and then I'd actually be curious to hear your perspective coming in, if you're willing to share as a new person, and what this process looked like, how it was similar and different maybe in St. Cloud as well, because I think sometimes we get in our Duluth vortex, and so it's always helpful to have some outside perspectives as well. So I'll let you respond first, Superintendent.
I was just going to say I've appreciated when people forward those emails that they're getting from parents or phone calls, and then I respond and CC you because I'm able to tell them whether their information is correct or not correct, or I can find out more about it, about wow, that's not my experience. Can you tell me more about that, so I can help to correct bad information or correct anything, or give them reasons for decisions if that was the decision. I hope that you do use us in that way, because it helps you too, because then people won't go directly to you. They'll talk to the principal, or they'll talk to me, or they'll talk to Jeff or Tim or others instead of going through you.
Can you say your question one more time so I make sure I hit on all those points?
Yeah, I was just curious, like I said earlier, this is the world that we know, so I just wasn't sure if you had any perspective from your previous experience working in other districts of this process. And
are you referring to the 1.9 million or just the budget process overall, or
both?
It's hard for me to speak to the budget process overall because I've only seen kind of the tail end of it. So I probably can't speak as well to that. What I can speak to probably is what I have seen here in the last month in terms of the 1.9 million. And I think that what's been done in this situation is it's really a shifting of money pots. Finance is complex. And when you move into the world of special education and some of the other worlds, it gets even more crazy and complex, to the point where directors of special education sometimes don't even understand really how their budget works. They need somebody in finance to really interpret that for them to help them program. So in my experience in working with the board, it's been more simplified versions because it gets pretty dicey unless you go to school and have a degree, and it gets pretty complicated. And I've seen that pretty consistently across the board, that there usually does have to be a lot of trust and leadership to do those things. That doesn't mean that the board shouldn't be given information and so you can speak to it. That part is definitely important. I think in terms of what happened here, I think it was actually extremely creative to make sure we didn't have to lay off staff. We were looking at a situation, we have $1.9 million in adjustments we need to make, and I thought, just from my outside opinion, bringing in Peggy into the conversation, saying, what can you do, having Jason go and look at the actuals versus the estimates. That's not actually, there's really no cut there. It's just that's a process we've gone through anyway. It's just we know that on the forefront instead of the back end. So in like a finance situation, you might end up with a little bit of extra money at the end and say, oh, well, we actually spent less than we thought we would, so we have a little bit extra. We know now going in we don't have that, and so we have to stay really strict to that. So I think it was pretty creative in how we did that and how we were able to keep student programming in place and staff, take care of staff with this. So I thought I think it was a pretty creative approach, and I think it takes a good knowledge of finance to be able to do those creative things. And so I was impressed, to be honest with you, that we were able to do that, because when I'm looking at 1.9 million, I'm like, oh geez, So I thought that was pretty good. So.
Thank you. I want to be really clear that creative is still legal. When you talk about creative budgeting, it makes me a little bit nervous. Thanks for that perspective. I appreciate it. Any additional feedback that we got from ARC around how we compare to the other districts who they're working with?
We are larger by far than any of the districts that they work with. And so, initially when they came in, they thought, oh, well, we'll do it this way. And then we said, well, here it is. And they said, maybe we'll do it another way. And so they weren't able to go into some of the areas that they thought they would be able to in quite the same depth. But like I said, they were really impressed with how well our directors knew their budgets and how clear everything was once they got into it. There were a few areas that they found some things, but to be within, it's less than 2% of the budget error, and if we had a healthy enough reserve, 2% variance from year to year, one way or another, wouldn't be such a big deal. But because our reserve was emptied out when the new special education formula came whizzing through town, it is a big deal when we're less than 2% off of our budget. And so that's why it was really important to do this review and to see these results so that our budgeting can be as exact as possible.
And just as a follow-up, in lieu of, realistically, if we're going to be doing interviews with CFO candidates in the coming weeks, and then by the time they give notice, maybe have to move or not, is there discussion at the district level or interest, both on our part and the part of ARC, of working with them on those areas where they didn't have the opportunity to dig into to the degree that they would have liked between now and when we have a new person come onto the team?
There was discussion about our interest in becoming an ARC member, and under those circumstances, they would be happy to help us, but they really just looked at this as a one-time contract, as really a help to a neighbor district. They would love to work with us in the future. It would mean that we would need to change our softwares to be their softwares. Otherwise, it's really too much work for them because it's going back to doing it by hand in spreadsheets rather than the software that they use every day.
I did want to give you a follow-up, just to give you some some sense of ease about when I say about kind of be creative with the budgets. There are different pockets of money sometimes, state, federal, that you can do different things with. An example of program we have, and I'm going to take us into a static bubble, so I'm going to say instead of Duluth, I'm going to say School District X. School District X wants to do some things with early intervention, for example. So there are programs out there such as ADSIS and CEIS, which are different ways to fund those instead of general education dollars. So we can do programming for at-risk students. In ADSIS, for example, you get roughly 50% reimbursement from the state on that, and so at 50% of the cost, if we fund it that way, we can do that. Now, let's say we want to do a budget adjustment and move some more money into there, some more costs for supplies or something like that, we could put that into our ADSIS budget, and so we cut our costs in half in that situation. We might want to recode something to CEIS as an early intervention. We might want to code some supplies to there to open up funding for something else, because we're going to do it. So when I talk about getting creative, it's all definitely legal, and it's just about shifting what that program will allow you to do. And if you understand it well, this is why I said I really thought it was great that he was able to do that, and shows me that he understands budget a lot. That if you understand what those different programs can do, then you are able to do that. But a person who doesn't know that would not see that there is very, very much a legal way to do that, which can really do a lot of things like this where we don't have to see a reduction in staff. So all of it is very much legit, it's very legal, but you have to know and understand the intricacies of that, and having people like Peggy on board are just really helpful in that process.
That was a helpful explanation. I wasn't intending to suggest that anything was happening illegal. I just get budgets and creative in the same sentence make me a little nervous. Mr. Spooner?
I just wanted to clarify to Member Oswald my comments earlier. I'm fairly certain there won't be any implications to LTFM projects, but nobody can predict the weather, and we can't predict what utility costs will be in 2020, for example. So, I mean, there could be, as well as some projects come in much higher than they're estimated, and we just don't know. So I can't tell you with certainty there won't be. I mean, there could be, but I don't think there will be at this point. But I just want to make that clarification that I can't guarantee there won't be a project modification. And for example, I'm just looking at 2020 right now, and in the plan for 10 years we've had the transportation roof. But do we know if we're keeping it? Do we know if we want to do the roof? I mean, that may be a modification that may not get done. I just want you to be aware that there could be a project that doesn't get done, and it may or may not be related to funding. So I didn't want to make too broad of a statement there.
Thanks, Mr. Spooner. If you could speak up a little bit. I'm having a hard time hearing you. It's probably the fans. Any other discussion around the budget?
Can I ask a question to Superintendent Gronseth? So just to clarify, because I hear what you're saying about, what are we messaging and how am I handling that message? And so, are we actually cutting $1.9 million, or are we not? Are we I guess shifting or reallocating where some of those things are coming from? And so when Member Oswald goes to talk to a constituent, how can she maybe phrase that?
The majority of it is shifting, shifting costs to different funds. I think some of the reductions are reductions, but they're not because we're reducing the budget. It's because there's different needs and staffing levels in different areas, and then probably about 100,000 of it is actually cutting from different budgets across the district in smaller amounts. So it's not necessarily 1.9 million in reductions, although it's 1.9 million reductions in general fund.
Member Lofeld?
So is this an additional 1.9 over from what we went through in February and March? So we had a need to reduce our budget by how much in that and that direction we gave to you. We reduced it by, was it 2.4?
Was it?
Was it 3?
I was thinking it was around 3. We originally started with a 1.6 or 7 reduction, and then the investment in discretionary funds brought it up to 3. Then we did some more shifts, the biggest one from general fund to LTFM. And so this was in addition to those.
I'm looking it up right now.
Anything else to add, Superintendent? Otherwise, we'll move on to the...
I was just going to say that,
Sorry.
I was wondering if you was looking it up right now, because you can look it up.
I was. The base deficit was 1.6 million. We made new investments of 2.5 million for a total of 4.1. So the actual deficit was 1.6. This was 1.9, so that brings us to about 3.5.
Member Lefferkamp?
Yeah, can you go back to your presentation on the budget review results, and you talked about overestimated revenues of enrollment projections, and I think I heard you say 2 grade levels were over. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Thank you. When ARC looked over the enrollment projections and compared to the enrollment projections that we had created, grade 11 was markedly different, significantly different than both our preliminary projections and what ARC had found. And so we had to make an adjustment there. And then kindergarten was also quite a bit different, although kindergarten is our most difficult grade level to project. And it kind of depends on what you're using as data for that decision. You know, sometimes school districts will go right on county records from birth rates for that year, or 5 years prior, rather. Other districts, like us, we will use birth records, we'll use our kindergarten roundup, we'll use our preschool screening numbers. We try to bring as much information into that as possible. And then there were other grade levels that were within, say, 10 students. And so those are kind of based on historical data too. It may turn out that our enrollment comes up above where we were projecting, and then we'd be able to add some more staff into schools. It may come out areas are below what we're projecting. As our principals and our clerical have come back to work this week, we'll be working through all of those summer shifts and learning about families that moved away and learning about families that moved in, and adjusting our records appropriately. We have about 1,000 kids who come in and out of the district a year, and so it takes a bit of paperwork and data entry to update those records, and we'll be pulling those consistently over the coming weeks before school starts. Weeks? It's still weeks, right? And we know that there are a couple of grade levels here and there that we have to keep an eye on based on what the numbers are. If they're down a couple, they'll be okay. If they're up a couple, we're going to have to add staff. And so we'll be working through that with the principals and the clericals and keeping an eye on things. This year was also different for us because last year's 17-18 enrollment had some unique adjustments to it. One was a response to some changes that the parochial school system was making. They made some grade level changes and they made some tuition changes, and we saw a number of families come back to the Duluth public schools. We also had, in the year prior, we had many families keep their 5-year-olds at home that would have usually come to kindergarten, and they started last year, and so we saw a bump in kindergarten. So we're trying to figure out how to handle those numbers while we're doing our projections, because we base it on historical data as well. So there are a number of things that could have gotten in the way there.
Great, thanks for that clarification. I just put a plug. In my neighborhood, we have probably 60 kids under the age of 6, and 4 kids just moved in. You know, I mean, so I certainly get how those numbers can change, and I think it's just really important as board members that we're explaining to people. At my night out party, I was explaining a lot about how that process works in terms of shifting in numbers and class sizes, and so I appreciate that. I also, having an 11th grader, I appreciated knowing that's where there was some changes there. But, you know, the more we can continue to educate the community and families on how enrollment changes at this time of the year especially, I think it's helpful for our PR.
Any other discussion? All right, thank you. Moving on to the referendum discussion. Let's take a break, 5 minutes. So people can go to the bathroom, get some water. Yeah. Stick your head under a cold faucet so people don't pass out.
It's not that hot.
I'm going to bring us back to the committee table, please. Do we have everyone here, I think? Thank you. Are the boys coming? Okay. All right, let's move on to, or resume begin our discussion around the renewing and potential expansion of the general education revenue through the referendum process. I'm just going to open it up for discussion. Do you have something to say? Oh, you're going to do the presentation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi. Reverse discussion, right? Yes, last month you took action that caused us to do some homework and develop a recommendation for a package. In prior months building up to this, it was a topic of Think Kids. We talked about priorities and different priority areas that we wanted to consider. We worked with our Quality Steering Committee, which is a committee made up of teachers and administrators and district staff. Rosie sits on the QSC as a school board representative. We had professional community polling done who it was 650 households that they talked to. That was a reflection of the community and the makeup of the community. I've met with community leaders such as the Chamber CEO, David Ross. I've met with the mayor, and I've met with the president of NAACP and other leaders in the community to get their feedback on levies and supportive levies. We've had staff meetings, and we've talked with financial and strategic advisors to get their advice on the best approach for this referendum, and so that it will best serve our students and our staff and our future financial stability. In the community polling presentation that we had from Morris and Leatherman, we learned that there is general support for a renewal and an increase in the levy. And the highest community priorities that came out in that polling overall was class size, and you'll see that is a priority going into this referendum. Classroom technology and student opportunities and achievement both came out as strong topics as well. And of course, the World's Best Workforce Plan is where we focus our attention as well. So those 5 goal areas that we talked about in the budget, those are also our areas of focus for a referendum. The first question that we're proposing, question 1, would be a renewal. That's just a continuation of the 371.78 that we currently have in place. When we passed this referendum, we talked about class size and curriculum and closing the achievement gap. Those are investments that have been in place since the referendum started, and this would continue that 16 to 18 full-time teachers, as well as the areas of curriculum and our strategies for closing the achievement gap. This does not result in a tax increase, and it would say that on the ballot as well. However, if question 1 fails, then question 2 and 3 automatically fail. So all of the questions are linked. Question 2 is about class size. It's an increase of $575 per pupil to the current levy, and that adds approximately 25 teachers district-wide to manage class size. It also allows us to increase site funding for specific supports based on needs. So our sites, based on their student populations, would have more discretionary funding to add specific supports to their sites. This would be a tax increase. It's $8.64 per month for the average home. And just a note that the average assessed home value in Duluth is $150,000. And this is based on assessed values, not necessarily what you bought your house for, but it's assessed values. And again, if question 1 and 2 fail, then question 3 would automatically fail. And so to move on, both would have to pass. The third question that we're proposing would be focused on one-to-one classroom technology. It adds $335 per pupil increase, which is about $5.03 for the average homeowner. Again, that $150,000 value of assessed value. This provides all students and staff with devices. It upgrades our technology systems. It allows for professional development, ongoing training for our teachers. You might remember when we had an innovation team. This would bring back our innovation team to work closely with teachers so that we are continuing to progress in our use of technology. So that it's not just a substitution, but is really modifying how we are teaching and restructures how we engage our students. It's about individualizing instruction, and it's really engaging students in the whole community. So, an example would be, they're not just doing an electronic worksheet where they're filling in the blanks. They're going beyond that to creating a multimedia presentation where they're including links to information or including interviews with themselves or interviewing someone electronically and including that information. So we're engaging our students in a much richer way. And our students, I was watching a YouTube video actually where it says, I got my student this new phone and I handed it to them. Of course, they took out the manual because they didn't even know how to turn it on, right? No, that's not the case at all. They take out the phone and they start showing us how to use ours better. And our students expect to use technology. They expect to be engaged in this way. We've had a lot of discussions around the table recently about our need to replace our aging technology. And this ask does that and moves us forward in a really exciting way. And so that is why the third question for us is on technology. We know that there are other important areas too. We know we'd love to see our class sizes even lower. We would love to see our opportunities expanded at middle and high school. There are other areas that came up as well, like early childhood, CTE. These were all areas that the community was interested in investing in. And this ask is in about that $5 range. If it were another topic, we'd have to adjust that dollar amount upwards a little bit because those investments are a little bit greater. But we're excited to present these three questions to you. I know Mr. Horton is especially excited because he's doing his dissertation on one-to-one technology and can give us all kinds of resources about the benefits. Without a renewal, so if not even question one passed, it would be a loss of $3.3 million in local education funding. And then the investments that we had made in class size and curriculum and in our strategies for closing the achievement gap, we would need to sunset those with the levy because we would no longer have the funding to do that. Without an increase, class size would continue to rise with our expenses. Each year there's that cost of living increase that we're seeing, and we haven't been seeing our school funding increasing at the same rate. With expenses rising higher than our revenues, it means that in the future we would have to continue to make cuts if we were to stay at the same level. Reminder here, 95% of school districts in the state have local education levies. So that is the majority of the state. Many of the districts that do not have an education levy are districts that have very few students. There's There's many, many districts in the state that have fewer than 200 students total, and it's very difficult for communities that are that small to have educational levies because it's not spread out over very many people. They also don't have the commercial tax base that we have. The proposed referendum questions are for 10 years. Increasing our funding for education helps community priorities and goals. It helps us to manage our class size. It increases the amount of classroom technology we have, the training our staff has, and it upgrades our infrastructure as well. So in our view, this really does create more student opportunities. It helps us to reach higher levels of achievement, helps our staff to grow professionally as well, and it will help the district to get to a place of long-term financial stability as we're able to maintain these investments. I always have to say that when we're talking about an investment over the term of 10 years, we won't be able to invest the entire amount on day one, because if we do that, that means the very next year we won't be able to afford that anymore. So our investments have to be somewhere in the mid ground. So probably about what the cost will be at 5 years. So you'll see us invest a little less in the beginning and a little more in the end, because we want to be able to maintain whatever we put in place for the full life of the levy and not have to make those reductions over time as the levy ages. So next steps, on the 21st, the scheduled board meeting, that's where you would be approving or disapproving the referendum package. August 23rd is our deadline for ballot language, so we are cutting it pretty close to get that language to the county. And then in October, there are all kinds of state requirements as far as notices in the paper and mailings that go out to everyone that lives in the district, and we would be doing all of that, plus many, many, many informational sessions so that people will be well aware of what the referendum questions are and the changes they could expect to see with passage of the referendum. And then, of course, November 6th is Election Day, and this package would go into place in January to be funded for the 1920 school year.
Member Oswald, I think you had your light on first.
I thought I had learned that that we can ask a technology levy question that's not connected to the other levy parts. So is there a strategy in offering it into the tiered system, or am I wrong that we could ask it separately?
Yeah, it could be separate if it were a capital bonding issue. It does change the formulas for how the tax is collected. So it becomes 6 different categories. So businesses, apartments, homeowners are all taxed at different levels, and it does put more of the burden on commercial properties and apartment buildings and larger properties in the community. It also limits what we can use the funds for. So it wouldn't be able to be, it's not the field techs to help us to sustain the devices. It's not the staff developers to help our teachers learn how to use it. We wouldn't be able to use those funds for training. It would only be for the devices. And so having it as operational gives us a little more flexibility with how we use that over time. In the beginning, we will have considerable investment in devices and infrastructure and staff training, and then those levels would be able to change over time.
And this wouldn't have any effect on the phase out of smart boards at all, or would it?
No, it gives us actually more flexibility. There's some weird echo going on.
Here, I'll shut mine off.
I don't know if that's it. It just was throwing me off a little bit. You know, if all of our students had devices and the teacher had a large monitor like this in the room, they would be able to manipulate on the screen just like they do on the smartboard, but they're doing it on the device in their hand instead of the one on the wall. It would also give students the opportunity to cast what they're doing onto the monitors as well. So we're engaging more of our students in the same way. But you know, I've said it before: smartboards are old technology, and if all of our students have devices, I think we're more able to individualize and engage all students.
I think smartboards are a standard now, but I understand that standard may not be needed if we have one-to-one. So I'll take either.
Member Sandstead?
I'm going to speak for the Luddite parents who actually, I think, make up a vast majority of the Duluth elementary parent population, who are much more interested in getting their kids outside and exposed to music and exposed to language than they are more screens. And so my hope is that we as a board will decide that instead of focusing our third question on technology, we will turn back to the researched and communicated and presented option of secondary school schedule, so that our middle schoolers can both take a language and music, and our high schoolers won't have the inequity of 0 hour requiring transportation, and instead will be able to take an additional elective. Everybody will be able to access that. So my intent at the meeting next week would be to make a motion to swap out our third ask being related to screens, and instead put in the secondary school schedule. I just looked back at the presentation we got in February. If anybody's trying, February Education Committee is where you'll find that. It's something that parents have been asking for. It's something that will draw more community, more families to our district, and it's something that parents want. I put this out on Facebook and got a lot of responses from parents and non-parents and kind of a diverse group of folks. I think every parent in Duluth that responded said they would prefer to have more elective options than they would a screen. So I hope that we can continue to gather more information, but that was the feedback that I got, and that's certainly consistent with what my understanding is of what parents are looking for here in Duluth and prioritizing in terms of their children. I also think that making our children more well-rounded and exposing them to more humanities and arts is significantly more beneficial than a different type of screen. So.
Member Lefflerkin?
I really appreciate this presentation. From being involved with many levies and coming here as a parent in the past, and just knowing the thought that was put in, particularly the thought that was put in the survey this year and the results we got from the survey. I have to say, while I wasn't at that discussion back in July, I did read it over and heard the discussion you all had, and the support that I heard all of you talk about for the results of that survey. And so I appreciate kind of this next step in the process. My support for kind of the three questions, I think it's a good approach. I think we've used this approach before. it's been a good way to educate the public in an understandable way. And in terms of the technology, as a high school parent, I actually support it for lots of reasons. And I am curious if you can talk about technology referendums that have passed around the state. I certainly think technology referendums seem to pass not only because the community understands it and sees that need, but which it sounds like from the survey we did, that came up really high again. So can you just speak to a little bit about technology referendums and the support both in the survey as well as how we've seen them pass statewide?
I don't have specific numbers for you. I do know that there are many districts that have technology levies in place. Most of them have moved to a one-to-one model using technology levy. As Member Oswald suggested, there's a couple different ways to do those levies. So I don't know the breakdown of those who have done operational for their technology versus a capital levy. But I do know that there are many districts, including the Hermantown, Proctor, Cloquet, Renshaw, Esco, are all moving to one-to-one technology. So even the small districts around us have far more technology than we have.
Member Lofald?
So I too appreciate the work that went into framing our questions. I heard Superintendent Gronseth speak that he has talked to the chamber, to the mayor and the leadership there, our polling, QWL, I don't think it was called that, steering committee, president of the NAACP, and then there was about 3 others that I just didn't write. So I feel that we've kind of gone through that tool of equity where we kind of have talked to our stakeholders. I think, did you mention teachers at all, somewhere? So I guess if we were to hold up our tool of equity and see if we've kind of run through that, at least we've covered. Not saying that if we had another question 3, that wouldn't meet the tool either, probably does. For me, it would come down to my classroom experience in the classroom, knowing that there's a couple of things. If we go back to the February presentation of Dr. Carey's group that went through a variety of schedules, really good work, but in the beginning stages. I don't think we're quite ready to know what that looks like to work with the middle school and the high school day. In fact, the middle school didn't look to any changes in what they were working on. We would have to give them that direction, which we would. I really don't want to pit these two, and some of your Facebook responses said they want both. So, and I also, it is in our language and how we share messages. Screen time is not what this levy is about. I've worked for years in the high school setting, and there is so much. We can put textbooks on our screens. We can have updated curriculum. We can project onto our smart boards from our screens. We can have kids answer and response right on there that goes up to the screen. I mean, there's so much more. I think it's unfair to communicate to our community that we want more enrichment and we don't want more screen time. I think down the road you're going to find that our commitment to technology draws more people in. I also feel that we do, this is picky, we do offer those, Member Stanza, we do offer a rich language, we do offer music, we do offer art. I know that the conundrum is that they can't fit it into their schedule, okay? But if they have devices, we can allow for more online opportunities to give them that advancement if they do that. I mean, it's hard to have music, I suppose, online. But again, we're looking at a technology-rich world, and yet Duluth has lagged, right? And I guess I'd also, I struggle, I want technology as our third question because I just don't think we're ready to put out there our schedule adoption. I just don't think we, as a board, I don't know enough about what the opportunity would be for a revised middle school and high school. And you're talking to a high school teacher for 40 years. I know what schedules look like. We can go to a mod schedule, we can go to a block schedule, which then has teacher contract language changes, which then has teacher curriculum changes. If I'm going to teach English now 3 hours a day, because that's what our levy monies went to, then to modify how I teach and my curriculum and my lesson planning is a whole lot more of an ask in our levy. I just heard Superintendent Gronseth say that maybe we'd have to ask for more than what's the technology ask?
The technology ask is $335 per student. And $335 would be, if you applied the same amount to schedule changes, there were 5 options that were presented in February to the board, and the $335 wouldn't be enough to cover all of those options. It would cover some of those options, and so if you wanted all the options to be viable financial options, then that dollar amount would be increased to something a little higher, probably around $375 per student.
And I just want to support our leadership in this levy. I don't want to get into a board discussion next week where we are not in agreement as to what we're asking. I just feel that I want a look at scheduling at the middle school and high school. But that ask, I don't think, is this year. I think technology is a really attractive vote. I think it's something that the whole community will embrace. Our adults that don't have any children in the district anymore, I think, understand the need for technology. I don't think they always understand looking at adding, and again, if we phrase it like we're adding electives, I think that language is misleading. We are allowing more opportunity, but there's opportunity on the tech side as well. I think we can reduce the achievement gap with individualized learning on individual devices. You have a lot more opportunity. If I'm teaching English 9 and my 9th graders have individual devices, then I can individualize their reading strategies. Where right now, I don't have that ability. At Denfeld right now, I couldn't even bring my full class to the computer lab because there's not enough computers. I really feel like the ask for technology right now, not to dismiss schedules, but that's a priority. We are kind of at a really low ability to use technology if we don't have this referendum to go to some more devices. Right now, we don't have enough computer space, computer labs. Some teachers have Chromebooks, not all teachers. I think that is an equity issue. So I really believe that the technology ask can address a lot of issues that's more attractive to our whole community.
Thanks, Member Lofeld. So a quick question, and then I'll go back around the table to folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet for sure. I'm curious about how you decided that was the question that was going to be asked when it ranked in lockstep with 3 other options: lowering of high school class sizes, expansion of early childhood programs, and change of the high school schedule. We already have quite a bit of staff investment that has gone into the changing of the schedule. And when we look at our population as a whole across the community, we know the return on investment for early childhood programs. We know how that's going to impact long-term our graduation rates. And when you look at the percentage of the population in the city of Duluth that has the highest percentage of people living in poverty or who are homeless, it's children under the age of 5. And so it seems to me that if we're being really, I agree in the technology side, and I'll say I'm a little jaded today, all of our computer systems across all of our clinics across 4 states went down, and so that's why I've been on my phone, my apologies. So there certainly are upsides and downsides. Technology can also be an equity issue because we're assuming that students have access to wireless internet or some sort of internet in their homes. But I'm just curious how you decided on that being the choice for the third question.
First of all, you don't necessarily have to have wireless at home to be able to do your work, because you can download it at school and then work on it at home. Well, like I said, I had conversations with many people, and I leaned on the polling, and like I said, it's about equal support for those areas. The other piece that we looked at is, as a third question, to keep the ask as reasonable as possible. Also, our conversations about technology. We did have an innovation department. We were buying Chromebooks at a pretty good rate, and we had staff that was working with our teachers to be able to change how they were teaching. And there was a plan in place. We talked about the technology plan that had several different layers, and so a lot of time and effort went into developing that plan as well, and started down a road using technology. And the classrooms that I go into, where teachers have been really well trained on how to engage students and how to individualize their learning with computers, is really inspiring. And I've seen it at all levels, from elementary through high school. And so I know that this was an area too where, with budget reductions, we decreased the number of innovation integrationists that we had, and then we wiped out the department, and then we decreased technology budget, and then it was a board request that we make a task force to look into schedules, and so that's what we did. And we spent a year and researched different models and proposed those models. And in talking with staff as well, like Member Lofalt was saying, some of the changes are more complex than others. Changing to a new schedule not only changes the schedule, it's not just adding one more course to the day, it's restructuring all of it, going to mod schedules or block schedules. Those were the options, which changes a year-long course to a semester course that takes different strategies to teach that. It also would change our schedules. It has implications for transportation. It has a lot of moving pieces to it, and it is a more costly endeavor than some of the others we're looking at. Early childhood, you mentioned, we believe that the state is really focused on early childhood expansion. We believe that the legislature is going to increase funding in those areas. It's also an area where if we pass that and said we are going to offer all-day K to everyone, we really wouldn't have the capacity in our buildings to do that without changing our grade configurations and our boundaries. And so there are pieces that, yes, we absolutely want to get there, but they're not as easy as saying, if the voters say yes, we can do this in the fall.
And I understand that, and so technology might seem like a lower hanging fruit, both from a financial standpoint and from a strategy implementation standpoint. I'd be curious to know what the financial projections are for Chromebooks, and if we're going to be in another debacle in 5 years where we have a bunch of smart boards. But I certainly understand the desire to make this understandable for our community, but I also think we need to be very strategic about where it is that we're putting our investments. And we invested a year in working with folks on changing the high school and the middle school schedules because it was identified as a priority, and I don't know what's happened with that since then. I'll let you chime in here in just a quick second.
I just want to say, sorry, Chair Trinka, I have to go, but I will look forward to watching the rest of this conversation as it unfolds. Sorry for dropping a bomb and leaving. But
have a good night. So I understand the implementation pieces. I would imagine that technology may have to change some contracts anyways and change the way that people teach, and I understand all those different pieces. But if we want to be really thoughtful and strategic about creating one of the best school districts in the state, I don't know that expediency is the way that I would like to approach that discussion. So just my feedback. Member Gorham.
One of our goals as a district is to reduce achievement gaps, and the strategy we employ to do that is multi-tiered systems of support, one of the strategies that we do. How does this potential investment help reduce that achievement gap? What's the level of evidence on that, maybe, if we know? If there's not an answer, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I'm curious.
You're kind of looking at me, so I'm guessing that this is for me. I can tell you what I know through research and what I know through personal experience. The trend, Clayton Christensen wrote a book probably, I think it was it 2018? It had been 6-8 years ago now. And in his book, he talks about the shift to individualized learning. And he was really kind of an innovative thinker. And he talks about how he predicted it was around 2014, 2015, that we were going to see a shift in education. And we finally would actually have the capacity to truly individualize learning. And I think when you take a look at school districts like Minnetonka, you go take a look at Wayzata, you take a look at some other leaders in innovation across the state, they were some of the early adopters of this. In fact, actually, one-to-one technology isn't even that new. I remember in the late 90s when school districts were starting to go to the laptops and stuff like that. What's changed is the internet and its ability to access resources, to move a teacher from a stand and deliver model to a facilitator of knowledge. You now have more information at your fingertips than we've ever had in the history of mankind, and it's the facilitation of knowledge and allowing students to individualized learning, to move. Daggett has this rigor and relevance framework, and there's 4 quadrants, and the goal is to get out to D, to be creating on your own, to take a concept and apply it to an unpredictable situation, and be able to manipulate it and think about it in an abstract way. That's higher level differentiation. That's where you take your higher students. Well, if I'm with some students, for example, and I have students all over the board, and I give them a formative assessment, which happens in our PLCs. If we're working on our MTSS teams, we say we need to do some differentiating to meet students' needs. We can take this device. It's not a book. It's not I'm doing a Kindle thing here. I can now take this information. I can send my students in different directions. I'll give you an academic example, and I'll give you a behavior one. You talk about world's best workforce, so I'll talk an academic, and I'll talk about disproportionality and equity and how that fits into this. I'll do it kind of through a story. A team I worked with, we went, I've done one-to-one device implementation, I think like 4 times, I've been part of that conversation. And one thing that we did when we started that is we had new standards coming out. And what we did is we took the new standards, we worked general education teachers, early intervention teachers, and special ed teachers, and as a team we looked at the standards. And we said, how can we ensure all students access these standards? And so we took an iPad and we used iBook Author was the program. And basically you can write a book on it. We sat down and we embedded the standards through an online curriculum with iBook Author. And that was at a 9th grade level. We then went through systematically and we said, okay, let's make this at a 7th grade reading level. So students who are below reading level in our secondary sites can access content. As much as I love investing in early education stuff, what are we going to do with our kids when they get to our secondaries and can't do it? We can invest in early education as much as we want, and we will help that, no question. I want to do that for sure, but we're still going to have students who are struggling along the way. Then we took it down to a 5th grade level. Then we took it down to a 3rd grade level. And we were able to differentiate what was going on. It was the same content, but a student who was unengaged before because they couldn't access the information suddenly was able to access the content and participate in a conversation. I had a student who was reading below a 3rd grade level, sat in the corner. First day I met the student, sitting in a corner by himself. Teacher had given up, sitting in a corner, completely ignoring what was going on. It was in a different course. But through using one-to-one devices, that student became engaged and actually ended up being one of the leaders in the class because you know what? That student learned differently. That student watched the History Channel like no one else. And I'll tell you what, I'll put them up against that student up against any AP student, not to write a paper, but to talk about what happened and to interpret history. We saw a student who went from a disengaged, failing student to a student who earned an A- in a high school course because of how they were now able to access. It changed the game. It changed the playing field. And I think to talk about equity, it does that too. Glenn Singleton, in his book Courageous Conversations, talks about systemic racism and how we need to approach that to break barriers to get through. One-to-one devices is one tool that can be used. And a lot of it, I like that it's not attached to capital and that's attached to an operational levy, because when you see it fall short, it tends to be the professional development around it. It's not the device itself, it's the training of the staff and the supporting the staff to move to this new concept, to rather than being the stand and deliver, to being the facilitator. And that's a tough concept. On the behavior side, when you take a look at some things that I've seen in terms of decreasing suspensions, again, it's a tool, it's a communication tool. And I remember a Setting 3 program that works with high-level special education students, emotional behavioral disorders, lots of absenteeism, lots of tough behaviors, things like that. Through using these devices, the teacher was able to transform their program to getting students out of that special education setting and putting them into the regular education classroom by slowly transitioning them. A student who has high levels of anxiety, for example, who was chronically truant, suddenly had a communication device with the case manager, and so the case manager would be sitting in the classroom, and they were doing problem-solving strategies to help that student with anxiety to problem solve instead of leaving the classroom, walk in the building, maybe eventually getting down there by the end of class, and then the whole hour, they were in the class for 10 minutes. Now, through a scaffolded process, that student learned the skills to stay in class, learned how to problem solve, had a connection to somebody, and then this teacher did this with all the students in the program, and eventually the teacher didn't have a Setting 3 program really anymore. They were all out in the mainstream. Their grades were up, their behaviors were down. We saw increases in attendance and engagement. And those are just a couple quick examples, but that's how it could support MTSS to really individualize strategies and to think differently about how we're educating kids. And so it's not really the Chromebook or the iPad or whatever. It's a tool, and when done with good professional development, it transforms the way you think about learning, and just opens up new opportunities. And I think it allows students who, and just kind of speak to the internet issue too, even not the downloading, but a lot of school districts have asked that same question. What do we do with students who can't go home and access these things? They've worked out a lot of partnerships with the city. They've created voucher systems to get internet. The community gets on board, and there's been a lot of support for getting students access to online, getting them online, and they've actually helped support that and stipend that, scholarship it to make sure they have access. So there's a lot of things that have been done in other districts that have run into those barriers that we could look to say, hey, how are you doing that? And my opinion, I guess, is not because I'm so excited about screens, because, I think we have to be careful what we do with them, and I'm not just saying let's go on iPads and have a great time. Let's teach them how to use it appropriately, and it's really the concept that it supports you to do. There'll be some days where that thing should sit down and over here, and we shouldn't open it up because it doesn't impact our learning today, but there's days when this thing becomes a pretty amazing tool to allow us to engage. And so for our PLC work, we want our teachers to have successful win periods, correct? In order to do that, if I really want to individualize win, this allows me to individualize win. This allows me to get at those standards and to support those things. So that, I know I got a little long-winded, but there's a lot more I could share, but I'm going to stop there because I've been talking for way too long. Thank you.
Member Oswald?
So it was mentioned that all the other districts around us are adopting one-to-one technology, but we have to remember that all the other districts around us offer 7 periods in their secondary schools. And that's been a discrepancy a long, long time. I believe our job as a school board is to provide excellent education. How that's delivered is debatable, but I see having to change up our schedules as being an attractor to our district for people that want something different. But I can't discount technology either. as a profound lover of STEM education, I know the value of a Chromebook. I'm not sure about a Chromebook in the hands of a kindergartner yet, but maybe I'll get there. So this is a real dilemma to me because I really want to see schedules change. I know the public wants 7 periods. They want more education. It's our job to give them more. They're asking for more. We should give them more. I'm also confounded by the 280 other plus PSEO students that are attending Lake Superior College with my daughter this fall. Not all of them are from Duluth. They're from the surrounding area too. But the district has to pay money to Lake Superior College for those kids. And why my daughter has done it, in part, is because she can't get the CIT classes, the CITS classes at Denfeld, and be guaranteed that she can graduate with an AA degree. It's simple math for her to go. She's not going to gamble her future on, the whim of a scheduling computer that spits out classes. So I do see a compromise in here, believe it or not. I see that we offer a separate capital technology levy to buy the Chromebooks and the infrastructure, and we add the staff and the staff development part to the class size ask, and make the third question about changing schedules. And we don't have to change schedules come this fall, just like using the scheduling money. I mean, this has to be planned out in a planned out, thoughtful process, and so maybe it happens in year 2 or year 2.5 or whatever, but that seems like you put it in the voters' hands what they value more. They are more likely to pass buying the Chromebooks, but if the class size fails, then we don't have the staff to do the professional development, but we can make that a priority later. We don't have to buy the Chromebooks just that day, just that year. We can wait a year and change how we do things. There's lots of opportunity here. I would like to give the voters the maximum amount of choice in what they want. Do they want different schedules? Do they want technology? Do they want decreased class sizes? I think they want them all. And I would really hope that we can lobby and be out there and be proactive in telling the value of each one of those things to get our community behind us again. I think that's the fairest compromise.
Chair Kirby?
Thank you. Well, I agree with Member Sandsted's concern about classes in music and other things. I have 2 children. One of them has had to deal with that already, and the other one is going to have to. And you're talking to somebody who started school when there were actual blackboards. They were black then with chalk. So I've come a long way. I will also tell you that in the New York Times recently, Ohio State is giving 11,000 incoming freshmen each an individual device. All of their attendance will be taken by Twitter. I mean, it's a different world. And I think that our kids need to deal with that. The biggest arguments we have in our house are over screen time. I get that. But looking at the Leatherman report, actually, I think it was 72 and 73% agreed to a tax funding. But if you looked at how many were strongly for these, it was much different. 46% had strong agreement for lowering class sizes, 43% strong for updating infrastructure, 36% for high school schedules, and 39% for early childhood. So even though the overall agreement was there, there was much more agreement for technology updates in that data. So I think that, I want to get the class schedule stuff done. I think it's important, but given all of the other components that involves, I think that the technology ask is probably our best bet at this point, and I would support that. And I don't think everybody's going to Ohio State. I bet nobody does from Duluth. But just say it.
I applied when I went to school here. Member Lofeld?
Well, thank you, Chair Kirby, for breaking down this survey, the polling from last month. That I didn't look at that detail, but my concern too is I want the third question to pass. I think that sometimes there might be this idea that we're putting a third question so that 1, 2 does pass for sure. And so I think technology it's so close in the polling. I just find that it is something that the broader community, I think we could pass all 3, which would be a tremendous advantage to our kids. I worry about the fact that if we go to the schedules, that increase would have to go up because contractually, and then teachers have to vote on this, don't they? If we go ahead and change the schedule, isn't that a contractual thing where teachers would then have to agree to it? And what if they don't? I don't know. I mean, and then then as a school board, we pit ourselves against our best. Our 85% of our polling said they loved our teachers and have strong feelings about our competent staff. And I'm just hoping that our leadership has talked to significant teachers as to technology, because listening to Assistant Superintendent Horton, I realize now too that technology is going to put a whole new plate in front of our teachers. And I have to tell you that as a classroom teacher, without the professional development, it's a waste of money to give us the Chromebooks, because we really need the innovation team that Mr. Gronseth talks about. I had just a few opportunities, maybe 4 or 5 years. Honestly, they would come out and do little mini workshops from like 7:45 to 8:30 on all the different things we can do with smartboards, and I just thought it was so incredibly beneficial. If they would have not had those, and I did a little summer camp of a week to integrate music into all kinds of different presentations I would do, and without those opportunities, I think that a technology levy wouldn't meet its goal of bringing all the things it's capable of. And again, I really see this technology as it's not more screen time. In fact, sometimes you could say, as the answer to the Wi-Fi thing, is that nothing goes home. There is no homework, especially in our elementary. There's research that says we shouldn't be bringing homework home for kids at certain ages and in certain levels. And so, but I also like that Assistant gave us some options that other districts are doing with that inequity. But I do feel like multiple intervention strategies it is so incredibly beneficial. You don't know what it's like to teach a 9th grade everybody's at a different level, and you can't help them as much as you could. But I think the one-on-one devices can answer that. I like everything else. It's not like I don't. We do have music and language and richness. I think that we don't want the message out there that we don't provide those. I do know that kids have to make choices, but kids have to make choices all the time. And so there's just tough choices because we don't fund education like we should. And maybe down the line we can go to, when we're ready to adopt the new schedule at the middle school and high school, can we go for that kind of referendum for that? Like the referendum you want to wrap into technology? Can we use that as a referendum for middle and high school, or no? I'm not enough about referendums or levies, operational versus educational or facilities, but when can we go and ask for another referendum? 5 years? Next year? You can...
Whenever you'd like.
Whenever you like, because I just talked to a board member that's going for a referendum this year, and they passed one last year, and they're going for another one this year. Maybe we can opt and hope for that as a visionary, positive, moving forward board.
Member Oswald?
Did the superintendent need to talk first?
I was just going to say that there are also standards in technology and STEM that are difficult for us to meet without technology. But if there were an area where I feel like we don't prepare our students well enough, it is with technology. And I think that as Chair Kirby mentioned, colleges they expect that you are going to use technology when you walk in the door. And I think our students are walking in with a disadvantage in some cases because they haven't been using it at the same level as other students have. I know my own son who went into chemical engineering, that was his biggest learning curve when he went to school because kids were coming to other schools where they were using CAD programs and they were doing programming that he had never done, and that was his big learning curve. And so I believe that technology skills, I can't think of a career right now where someone doesn't have at least some exposure to a computer. My dad was a mechanic. I grew up in the garage next to my dad, and he could tell what was wrong with a car by standing next to it and having someone describe the noise it was making. Today you go to the garage, you hook up the computer to the car, and it tells you exactly what's wrong with it. I can't think of anything our students will do in life that doesn't involve technology, and I think it's so important for them to not only be able to use it, but be able to use it responsibly and use it well. And so I believe this is just a really important future phase for our students and our staff and our school districts.
Member Oswald?
I think it's important to remember that technology does not equal having a computer. Technology is how you solve a problem and engineer the solution. Yes, a tool is a computer, but not every one of our little Chromebooks is going to have CAD software on it. Not going to happen. That's very expensive, and we have special computers for that to handle that load. I wanted to address Member Lofeld's comment about the scheduling and the teachers. It's not like the board would ever shove a schedule down anyone and tell them to do that. It would be a negotiation, obviously, with teachers and what they want. Many teachers want 7 periods of some variety too. So there is lots of give and take there. If we're giving the message that we're going to go that way, then that opens up opportunity to talk about it. I am more worried about us not getting technology as a third ask. That's my worry. 3 levels of asks is questionable. I hope and I will work hard to pass 3 levels, but if it was a separate question and not part of that level, it's almost guaranteed, as Member Loeffler-Kemp had referenced, that more technology levies pass when they're separated from the regular levies. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that if we put a third ask in there about class size or about schedules, we'll know that's not the highest priority, but we'll still get the technology. Right now, if class size doesn't pass, we don't even get a shot at the technology, because if that's a no on question 2, we don't even get a chance to hear what they want to do on the third ask, because if question 2 fails, question 3 automatically fails. So I'm about wanting that technology too, and that's where it's a gamble, and I think the gamble is asking it separately. We at least get the computers, and we can get the staff, in decisions and budgets, but getting the computers is the biggest piece.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you suggesting 4 questions?
I'm suggesting the 3-tier and then the separate technology one. That's where we ask for Chromebooks and the infrastructure part as a technology levy question.
Gosh, I want to say so much, so I'm going to try and summarize a couple of things. Member Oswald, I didn't say, just to clarify, because I want my words clarified here, that the technology questions should be separate. I said that technology referendums are passing right now, not that they be separate. But I want to kind of spin back to when we supported the administration to pursue doing a survey, a public survey. We put a lot of time into thinking of those questions, and I know some board members were a part of those questions, coming up with those questions, and we got the results, and the results are saying a lot of things, but they are raising the technology question high in terms of being a part of our referendum questions. So I feel very strongly about supporting the referendum as question 3. I also just kind of want to remind folks that there is a lot of strategies around referendums and a lot of work that has been done on referendums here and across the country, and we're being advised by people who understand how referendums pass. And with all due respect, 5 questions, I haven't hardly even heard of it. It hardly ever passed. Well, you know, whatever. My point being is our advice we're getting is good advice, and we need to think strategically about what the public wants, but also what the public can afford, and how referendums pass or fail in Minnesota and here in Duluth. And so I just really urge us to be thinking about what we asked administration to do with the survey, what the survey is telling us, and what's the best way to move forward for the goals that we are saying we want our district to be about. And so I want us to move forward in agreement next week with the questions that we have. And I will tell you from door knocking and phone banking and being out there as a parent and as a community member that we need to make it understandable. And the reason that I'm so supportive of technology, not only because we know that the public supports it, but also that we can be accountable with technology if we did it or we didn't. Just like with teachers, you know, we said we hired 18 teachers, we did hire 18 teachers. You know, so that accountability is really important, and we need to keep, we need to think about that. The school structure, I think we all support. That's why we ask administration to work on that, but we're not there yet. And that's really a harder sell, but there's also lots of complications that have already been brought up, including contract language, and that's a pretty big complication. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Member Gorham.
I intend to support this as is next week. I think what I heard from Mr. Horton is that if you buy technology but don't fund the staff development to support it, it's not a useful tool. So I guess my thinking on that is if we're going to do it, let's do it right so that the investment achieves the goal. From what I'm recalling about the schedule issue, this is an important issue in our district, no doubt. But to me, it doesn't feel like the issue is fully cooked. I don't think we know the exact solution that we want. And when we don't have an exact solution, going to the taxpayers for money, we're not quite sure how it's going to trickle out yet, is a mistake. Let's get that thing cooked. Let's get that thing ready. And then go to the voters again and make a confident ask. I'm not sure we're there yet. I would need to go back and review our last conversation with Dr. Carey. But my recollection of that is that this thing wasn't ready yet, that this still needed at least another year of work to get somewhere where we're confident in the decisions we're making. That's not something I'm willing to go to voters and ask about. Thank you.
I'd just like to point out, too, the technology pie isn't entirely cooked either, and so I think that's part of the nice thing about a referendum is that you get 10 years to figure out what a good plan is. And so, you know, we're talking about Chromebooks and we're talking about, you know, different types of interactive technologies, but I'm guessing, especially with a certain person sitting at this table who's working on his PhD in this, should this pass, the plan could look different in a year than what might be swirling around people's brains now. As you know, a regular frustration of mine, it's just really unfortunate that we're having this conversation a week before we have to get it. I understand why, and we've had a lot of complications, and we had things that kicked the can down the timeline. But I think it's like, I feel like we're kind of always operating in a pressure cooker because we're always 48 hours away from You can disagree, that's fair. But I wish that we would have had a little bit more time and maybe a little bit more data around this, but Member Oswald.
I have a question on class size. So changing the subject. The ask is adding approximately 25 teachers district-wide to manage class size. Is part of that plan just offering 25 FTE and principals can use that how they see fit to add specialists or whatever, or are these going to actually be classroom teachers that decrease class sizes rather than supporting educational needs, I guess is what I want to say, but I know that's not right.
The intention would be that these funds would go to lower the teacher-student ratio. So when we do the allocations of FTEs in the fall, it's based on enrollments. And so we would, with the, should this pass, as part of the budget process, we would be making an investment in the teacher-student ratio to lower that across the board. How that looks at each school is going to be a little bit different based on how many students they have. I'm not going to create any illusions and say that 25 teachers is going to lower every classroom in the district, because 25 teachers can't do that in the scope of 13 buildings, but it lowers each one a little bit. At an elementary site, that might mean that they have one or two more teachers, and that doesn't translate to 6th grade levels being different, but it does translate in some of those classrooms being different. Maybe it's creating some combined classrooms to make sure that classes are lower across the board. At the high school, 1.6 FTE is how many sections? That's 16 sections. That would be offered, that wouldn't be offered otherwise. And so it lowers the class size, but it's not the perfect fix either.
So when we're out discussing this, and I don't know if this is a topic for here or not, if it's not, just tell me. So, I mean, are you wanting us to tell people that this would hire about 25 more teachers, or do you want us to tell people that this is allowing us to buy more teachers to decrease the ratio? I mean, because those are two different things in a public opinion poll. I mean, people get buying 25 teachers. People don't understand the ratio.
That's why we use the language of 25 teachers. We know how many FTEs a financial figure will purchase. We also know what it would change the ratio by. If we speak in ratios, then people don't understand quite what that means. And I want to be clear. So whether we use the language of the ratio or whether we say this is about 25 teachers across the district, the outcome is exactly the same. It does also allow us to increase the amount that's being invested at sites for specific needs. And so sites would also see an increase in staff, whether that be counselors or social workers or interventionists for reading or math, or like bar coordinator at Denfeld, or whatever a site determines its needs are, they'll be able to invest more to meet the specific needs of their school and their community. In addition to the district-wide investment in teachers.
Member Lessinger.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for the public a couple things. One is the schedule and the steps that are laid out here are pretty typical of districts that are working on referendums when this information gets to and when decisions are made. Because often, until the legislative session happens, till the budgets happen July 1st, till a great survey is done, can you really start putting language together? So yes, it would be great if we knew this in May, but this is actually pretty typical. And this is So I just want, people to understand we're doing well. And that was why I think the superintendent was so anxious once we got the survey to get a meeting scheduled, so we had time to think about that. Did it happen? I think July 19th, I was gone. A week almost from when we got the information. So the schedule is on track. It is going to be really critical that once we do make a decision and we move forward, that the educational plan, which is our role, the district's role, and the Citizens Committee's role, that we're getting accurate information out there. So, I guess really want to stress we're on track, but we do need to support and be in agreement with what we're supporting as a board.
Any other discussion around this piece? Seeing none, let's see, where are we here? I guess I'm just going to add, because we're 3 hours in, I'm going to ask if there are other pieces of information that folks would like to make sure that we touch on, given what's left on the agenda. The rest of the items are informational, which is why I ask. Mr. Spooner, you might have stuck around for nothing.
Can I ask if any of these placeholders are in play on the contracts?
I know we're close on the school resource officer. Right now, the attorneys are just giving it the once over on that one. The Heritage Center is close. We haven't received it back from Dan Matty on the Hills. Valley Youth Center, I'm not sure.
I think you've got that one, and I've got Rockridge, which I just got back today. So we need to meet with Jeff. Well, we still need to negotiate, but we have our final version from our attorney.
Good.
I will say that I've had meetings on all of these, and they are in process. And part of it is figuring out where we were when I was starting, and they should all be in place pretty soon. Rockridge probably, and SRO the first among them. I don't know that we will have them for next week, but next month certainly.
Any other discussion? Member Oswald?
Where'd it go? The 6H, the MSBA finally came out with their model policy, but it wasn't attached. Is that something we're voting on, or why is it there, or?
Is that a placeholder because we're still waiting on the final?
It wasn't a placeholder. It's item 6H.
Oh, that's right. You're right. Go ahead, Peggy.
At the agenda setting, I was asked to mention that the MSBA policy on public data requests is now out, so I'm doing a comparison of their policy with the one that the board had passed earlier in the year. So far, I've identified a couple things, and I think in the future we will be putting out maybe some comparison. I think there's some good language in the MSBA policy that we would probably want to include in ours. So whether that would be the discussion, whether we want to revise ours or delete ours and adopt the MSBA policy.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I just want to do a quick recap in terms of what we're asking for follow-ups. I know that there were some policy changes that we discussed, and because it was the first reading, we'll be discussing those again next month. But otherwise, I don't think that there are any significant asks for administration ahead of next week's meeting pertinent to this particular committee. All right, we'll wrap up. Thank you.